There is something instantly noticeable about a person who asks sharp questions, even if they do not look like the smartest one in the room. It hits you fast. You hear the question, and suddenly you realize this person is paying attention on a level most people skipped right over. It feels almost disarming, like someone just flipped on a light you did not even know was off. And the best part is that they usually do it without trying to sound impressive. They just want to understand what is really going on. Before we continue, a quick note. Many of you watch our videos but haven't subscribed yet, so please subscribe to our channel Restwise and join our growing community. We'd also love to know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's amazing to see how connected we all are. If you enjoy relaxing with philosophy, psychology, and science while drifting into sleep, give this video a like and stay with us on the journey. Now, let's get back to the video. What makes it so surprising is how quiet their intelligence can seem at first. They are not the ones tossing out random facts or trying to dominate the conversation. They sit back, they observe, they notice details that everyone else rushes past. Then, right when the moment is perfect, they ask something simple but impossibly precise. It might be a question about motive or timing or a tiny inconsistency no one considered. And suddenly the whole room has to rethink its assumptions. That is the shock factor of sharp questions. They reveal hidden layers, sometimes exposing truths people were avoiding without even realizing it. There is a psychological reason this kind of question carries so much weight. The human brain loves shortcuts. We follow the easiest mental path because it saves energy. Scientists call these mental shortcuts cognitive biases. They help us move through the world quickly, but they also cause us to miss important details. People who ask sharp questions interrupt those shortcuts. They force the brain to slow down and actually think. It is uncomfortable at first, but it is also a sign of deeper intelligence. They are not satisfied with the obvious. They want the real story. And if you have ever been around someone like this, you know it can feel almost spooky. You explain something you thought was airtight, and they catch one small thing that changes everything. Maybe they ask why the timing felt rushed, or why you trusted a person you barely know, or why you assumed something was impossible when you never actually tried. It is never aggressive. It is never rude. It just slices through the noise and hits the core. That is the moment you realize how sharp their mind really is. What makes this even more meaningful is that people who ask these kinds of questions usually care more about truth than appearance. They are not performing. They are not trying to corner anyone. They genuinely want clarity. And that kind of curiosity is a major sign of intelligence. Curiosity is the mental spark that drives learning, growth, and creativity. When someone asks a powerful question, you are witnessing their mind reaching beyond the surface. And here is something validating many people overlook. You might think you are not smart because you do not have flashy knowledge or you do not speak with academic confidence. But if you are the kind of person who picks up on subtle things and asks about them, you are showing real critical thinking. It means your brain is connecting dots other people do not even see. That is not loud intelligence. That is quiet intelligence, and quiet intelligence is often far deeper. There is also a social element to this skill. People who ask sharp questions tend to be strong listeners. They gather information while everyone else is waiting for their turn to talk. They notice tone, body language, hesitation, and contradictions. They build a mental map of what is true, and what is missing. Then their question drops right into the exact space where clarity is needed. That is why people remember these moments. The question feels like a flashlight cutting through fog, and maybe the most interesting part is this. Sharp questions often reveal more about the person asking them than the person answering. They show courage to confront uncertainty. They show confidence to explore deeper instead of staying comfortable. They show a mind that refuses to accept easy answers. And very often, they reveal that the person who seemed ordinary is actually several steps ahead. When someone can do that, you start to wonder what else their mind has quietly figured out without anyone noticing. Remembers small details. Some people reveal their intelligence in a way that is almost invisible until it suddenly is not. And one of the clearest signs is when someone remembers the tiny details that everyone else lets slip away. It can be something you mentioned in passing a month ago, something you did not think mattered, something you only said once. Yet they hold on to it like it was important. And when they bring it up again, it hits you with this mix of warmth and surprise because you realize they were paying attention when nobody else was. What makes this so powerful is how subtle it is. Remembering small details does not look like genius at first glance. It does not look like the stereotype of intelligence. But it is one of the strongest indicators of a sharp, active mind. And the moment you see it in action, you know you are dealing with someone who thinks deeper than they appear. There is a scientific reason for this. The brain filters out most of what we experience because it cannot store everything. So it prioritizes what feels necessary for survival or immediate relevance. But someone who remembers small details is running a different internal system. Their mind tags things that reveal patterns, emotions, or context. They store subtle cues because their brain is constantly trying to understand the bigger picture behind a person or a situation. That means they are gathering data quietly, constantly, almost effortlessly. And here is where the surprise kicks in. You can talk to a person like this for a while and never see it coming. They may seem casual, relaxed, maybe even distracted. Then out of nowhere, they mention the name of a coworker you only talked about once, or they recall the exact goal you were nervous about last year, or they remember how you like your coffee with almost eerie accuracy. It catches you off guard because it exposes something. It shows they were tuned in the whole time, and you cannot fake that level of attention. What is even more revealing is the intention behind it. People who remember small details are not storing them to win conversations or to show off. They do it because they genuinely care about understanding you or understanding the situation they are in. Detail-oriented memory is almost always connected to empathy or strategy. Sometimes both. Empathy-driven memory pays attention to feelings. Strategy-driven memory pays attention to information. Either way, it takes real mental engagement to hold on to the little things, and you see this in everyday interactions. When someone tells a story, most people only keep the main point, but the one who remembers small details remembers the timeline, the setting, the emotion behind the words, and even the parts you hesitated to say. That means they are listening with the goal of actually understanding, not just responding. Listening at that level is one of the clearest signs of an intelligent mind because it requires attention, working memory, and emotional awareness all at once. What makes this even more validating is that many people who do this never think of themselves as smart. They think they are just observant, or caring, or naturally attentive. But here is the truth. Remembering small details shows that your brain tracks connections most people overlook. You are noticing patterns. You are analyzing information in the background. You are building a deeper picture of people and situations, even when you are not trying. That is not accidental intelligence. That is active intelligence. There is also a fascinating social effect attached to this. When someone remembers small details about others, it creates trust. Not because the person is trying to impress anyone, but because it signals something fundamental. It signals that they see you. They hear you. They respect your inner world enough to hold on to the pieces you share. And people respond to that instinctively. They open up more. They reveal more. They feel safer. Smart people understand this dynamic, even if they do not consciously analyze it. They know the power of remembering what matters to someone else. And here is where a quiet twist comes in. Someone who remembers small details can often read people far more accurately than the ones who talk like they know everything. They notice inconsistencies. They pick up on changes in behavior. They remember the original story and catch when the new version does not match. They sense when something is off because the small details do not line up anymore. That is the kind of intelligence that does not need to announce itself. It just works beneath the surface. You start to realize how remarkable this trait is when you experience it firsthand. They remember what you were stressed about weeks ago. They recall the dream you did not think anyone heard. They bring up something gentle or meaningful at exactly the right moment, and whether they know it or not, they reveal a mind that is anything but ordinary. They reveal a person who pays attention with purpose, even if that purpose is simply understanding the world more clearly than most people ever will. Listens more than talks. There is something quietly powerful about the person who holds back while everyone else rushes to speak. You notice it only after the conversation ends. You start replaying the moment and realize they barely said a thing, yet somehow they understood everything. When someone listens more than they talk, it can feel almost unnerving because you sense they are processing the situation on a deeper level than anyone else in the room. You have probably met someone like this. They stay calm while everyone else competes to get their point across. They let others fill the space, they watch the dynamics unfold, and they absorb it all like a sponge. And then, at just the right moment, they say one sentence or ask one question that shifts the entire direction of the conversation. It feels like they saw the full landscape while the rest of us were still staring at a single tree. That is the shock factor hiding inside quiet listening. It reveals a mind that does not need the spotlight to understand what is going on. What makes this even more striking is that we live in a world where people talk constantly. Social media rewards loudness. Meetings reward confidence. Conversations reward whoever jumps in first. But none of that actually measures intelligence. If anything, constant talking can show a lack of clarity. The smartest people often use silence the way others use theories or arguments. They know that silence is not empty. Silence is information. They watch reactions. They study body language. They pick up on the tone behind the words. They notice what is said and what is avoided. That is a level of awareness that talking too much can bury. There is a psychological mechanism behind this. When you listen deeply, your brain engages something called active processing. It means your mind is organizing incoming information while it arrives, trying to find patterns, motives, and emotional cues. People who talk too much interrupt this process. because they are focused on producing words, not absorbing meaning. But strong listeners keep their cognitive bandwidth free. They use their mental energy to map out the situation. And that is why they often understand people more accurately than those who speak the most. And here is the part many people never admit. Listening takes confidence. Talking is easy. Talking creates noise that hides insecurity. But listening means you are comfortable enough with your own thoughts to let other people reveal theirs. You do not need to dominate the space. You do not need to show off. You can sit with silence without panicking. That is emotional strength disguised as calmness. And intelligent people tend to have that strength because they are not driven by the fear of being overlooked. They are driven by curiosity and accuracy. Something interesting happens when you talk to a person who truly listens. You might start by sharing something simple, something light, and before you know it, you are revealing things you normally keep to yourself. You feel strangely understood, even though they barely spoke. That is because deep listening activates a part of the brain related to social bonding. When someone pays attention to you with full focus, your mind reads it as safety. People trust those who make them feel heard, and people open up to those who make them feel seen. Smart listeners create that effect naturally. The validation hidden in this trait is important. Many people who listen more than they talk think of themselves as quiet or slow to respond or even socially awkward. They feel overshadowed by louder personalities. But here is the truth. If you listen deeply, you are mentally operating at a higher level than the people who fill the air without thinking. Your mind is collecting data. Your instincts are sharpening. You are learning more about people than they learn about you. That is a form of intelligence that does not show off, but it changes everything. There is also a strategic advantage to being the listener. When you say less, people reveal more. They show their intentions. They show their inconsistencies. They show their emotional state. They show what they fear and what they desire. You learn far more from them than they learn from you. That is why quiet listeners often end up understanding the social hierarchy in a group better than the loudest person does. They see the hidden currents. They sense tension long before anyone else acknowledges it. They can predict conflicts because they catch early signs. That insight comes from paying attention, not from speaking. You may have noticed this in arguments as well. The person who listens usually wins, not because they overpower the conversation, but because they understand every angle before speaking. They wait. They analyze. They choose their words with intention, not impulse. And when they finally respond, their point lands harder because it is built on understanding, not reaction. People feel truth when it comes from someone who actually heard them. And maybe the most compelling part of all is that listening more than talking reveals a person who values learning over ego. Talking broadcasts what you already know. Listening invites what you do not know yet. Smart people are hungry for new information, new perspectives, new nuances. They do not see silence as weakness. They see it as a doorway to insight. So when you notice someone sitting quietly, taking everything in, do not mistake it for passiveness. Often, the quietest person in the room is the one who leaves with the clearest picture. And the moment they speak, you understand just how much their silence was worth. Learns fast. It is almost impossible not to notice when someone learns fast. There is this moment where you realize they picked up something in minutes that takes everyone else hours, and it catches you off guard because it challenges the quiet assumptions you make about people. You think you know someone's limits, and then you watch them absorb information with this calm, almost casual speed, like their brain has gears the rest of us have never used. It makes you wonder what else they are capable of that no one has spotted yet. What shocks people most about fast learners is how unremarkable they often seem at first. They might not look like the stereotypical genius. They might not brag about how quickly they pick things up. They might not try to stand out at all. But give them something new, something unfamiliar, something that usually slows people down, and suddenly they are ahead without even trying. It is not loud. It is not dramatic. It is just obvious. They connect dots instantly, and you can almost see the moment their understanding locks into place. There is real science behind why this happens. The brain is constantly making predictions based on patterns it has seen before. For most people, that prediction engine works at a basic level. But fast learners have a mental system that connects new information to what they already know at lightning speed. They build frameworks. They form mental shortcuts. They test ideas in their mind before speaking them out loud. It is like their brain compresses information, strips away the unnecessary parts, and keeps the core truth. That is why they learn so quickly. They are not memorizing. They are integrating, and you can see this in small everyday moments. Maybe you show them how to do something on a computer, and by the second try they move as if they have been doing it for years. Maybe you explain a concept that usually requires a long breakdown, and they get it on the first pass. Maybe they watch someone solve a problem once, and suddenly they can do it too. It feels almost unfair, but it is not magic. It is cognitive flexibility, the ability to shift thinking rapidly and adapt. People with that skill can learn fast because they do not cling to old habits or rigid beliefs. They adjust in real time. Here is where the validation comes in, especially if you are the type who learns quickly but does not think of yourself as smart. You might assume everyone processes information the way you do. You might downplay it because it feels natural, but learning fast is one of the strongest signs of intelligence. It shows your brain is efficient. It shows your memory is active. It shows your mind is trained to recognize structure and meaning. Even if you do not talk like an expert, your ability to understand things quickly is proof that your thinking runs deeper than you realize. And here is something people often overlook. Fast learners are not always the fastest speakers. They might take a moment before responding, not because they are lost, but because they are digesting information at a level beyond the surface. They are forming an internal map, organizing the concept so it makes sense long term. When they finally speak, their clarity is obvious. They do not ramble. They do not get tangled. They explain things simply, often better than the person who taught them. That is the mark of true understanding. Fast learners also show a unique behavior that gives them away. When they encounter something new, they do not panic the way others do. They lean in. They get curious. They want to try it themselves. They are not afraid of the unknown. In fact, the unknown energizes them. This comes from a part of the brain tied to reward. When people enjoy the feeling of mastering something quickly, the brain releases dopamine, reinforcing the behavior. That creates a loop. The more they learn, the more they want to learn. The more they try, the more capable they become. It builds on itself. This trait also shows up in social situations. A fast learner can read new environments quickly. They understand group dynamics without needing things explained. They pick up on unspoken rules. They adjust their communication style. That is social intelligence in motion. It means they learn people just as fast as they learn skills. And that is why they often succeed quietly. They notice what works and what does not, and they adapt faster than others can react. What makes this trait even more impressive is how it affects long-term growth. Someone who learns fast does not stay the same person for long. They improve quickly. They evolve. They level up in ways that surprise people who underestimated them. Give them a year, and they will be unrecognizable. Give them 5 years, and they will surpass people who were far ahead of them at the start. That is the hidden advantage of rapid learning. It compounds, and most people never see it coming. If you recognize this in yourself or in someone else, understand what it means. It means you are not limited by how things begin. You are only limited by what you choose to expose yourself to. A fast learner becomes dangerous in the best way possible, because the moment they decide to master something, the timeline shrinks. Challenges that stop other people become stepping stones, and every new thing they learn becomes fuel for the next thing. So when you see someone learning at a pace that feels unreal, do not dismiss it as luck or natural talent. It is a sign of a mind built for growth, a mind that refuses to stay still, a mind that transforms every experience into knowledge. And once you notice it, you never look at that person the same way again. Spots patterns quickly. Some people can walk into a situation, listen for just a moment, observe a few details, and suddenly understand what is really happening long before anyone else catches on. It is not luck. It is not a good guess. It is a mind that spots patterns at a speed that feels almost unreal. And the moment you see it happening, you can tell this is not ordinary thinking. This is someone reading the world like it is a language they already know. You notice it when they predict something before it happens. Maybe they say a project is about to fall apart because one small element is off. Maybe they sense that a person is not trustworthy even though everyone else sees nothing wrong. Maybe they understand how a system works after seeing it once. Their insights land so quickly that it can make you pause and wonder how they figured it out. And that surprise you feel is the shock of pattern recognition in real time. This ability comes from a part of the brain that is wired to look for structure. Humans naturally look for patterns because patterns help us survive. But most people only see the obvious ones. A person with high pattern recognition sees the hidden ones. They see the rhythms in behavior, the repetitions in problems, the small clues that reveal the larger truth. And what makes this trait so interesting is that it often appears in people who do not act like traditional intellectuals. They might be quiet. They might be playful. They might seem distracted. But beneath that, their mind is constantly scanning for connections. You can watch this in how they listen. While most people focus on the surface of a story, the fast pattern spotter listens for the underlying structure. They catch the repeated words. They catch the tone shifts. They catch the timeline inconsistencies. They notice what is missing just as much as what is present. They gather micro details that seem meaningless on their own, and then, suddenly, they snap together into a clear picture that no one else saw coming. This kind of thinking comes from something psychologists call chunking. It means the brain groups bits of information into meaningful units. Most people do not do this consciously, but someone who spots patterns quickly does it automatically. When they encounter new information, their brain searches for previous experiences that resemble it. It checks for emotional similarities. It checks for structural similarities. It checks for logical similarities. And when the brain finds a match, everything clicks. That click moment is what makes people say, "That makes sense now," even though they could not explain how they reached the conclusion so fast. One of the most validating things about this trait is that people who have it often think they are just overthinking or reading too much into things. But they are not. They are recognizing patterns before those patterns become obvious. They can tell someone is pulling away emotionally before there is a clear reason. They can tell a plan is flawed before it is tested. They can tell when a situation is about to repeat a familiar outcome. That is not paranoia. That is foresight. And foresight comes from pattern recognition. You also see this skill in problem solving. Give them a puzzle, a broken process, or a confusing situation, and they do not get overwhelmed. They start looking for familiar shapes. They search for the root cause instead of the symptoms. They notice that every time something goes wrong, the same trigger shows up, or every time progress stalls, the same behavior appears. Their brain is like a radar for repetition. Once they spot the repeating element, they know exactly where to aim their energy. Here is something fascinating. Pattern spotting is not only logical, it is emotional too. Someone who understands emotional patterns can sense when a person is acting from fear, jealousy, insecurity, or pressure. They can predict how someone will react based on how they reacted before. They notice the loop. That is why they give unusually accurate advice. They are not guessing. They are recognizing the emotional script that is already unfolding. This ability creates a quiet kind of power. When you see patterns before other people do, you make better decisions. You avoid mistakes more easily. You do not fall for the same trap twice. You learn from experiences at a deeper level. You grow faster because you see the blueprint behind the situation, not just the situation itself. And if you are someone who spots patterns quickly, you may not realize how rare that is. You might think everyone thinks this way, but they do not. Most people need repetition to understand what is happening. You need only a few clues. Most people need time to understand why something feels off. You can sense it almost instantly. Most people learn in a straight line. You jump ahead because your brain connects the dots before the dots are even fully visible. This trait can even make you appear intuitive, almost like you have a sixth sense. But intuition is not magic. It is the brain recognizing a pattern faster than you can explain it in words. That is why your insights feel sudden and effortless. They do not come from nowhere. They come from thousands of tiny signals your mind picked up and organized in the background. When someone can spot patterns this quickly, it reveals a mind that is always one step deeper than it looks. They see structure where others see chaos. They see signals where others see noise. And once you realize someone has this ability, you never underestimate their intelligence again. Stays calm under pressure. There is a moment most people never forget, and it happens when everything around you feels like it is falling apart. Yet one person somehow stays steady, while everyone else is panicking, rushing, snapping at each other, or spiraling into worst-case scenarios. This person almost becomes clearer, sharper, more present. It is like pressure does not crush them, it sharpens them. And you cannot help but stop and think, how are they staying so calm right now? What shocks people most about someone who stays calm under pressure is that they do not always look like the strongest personality in the room. They might be quiet. They might be laid back. They might even look like the last person you would expect to handle chaos. But the moment things get intense, something inside them clicks into place. While others lose focus, they gain it. While others get emotional, they get grounded. And that shift reveals a level of intelligence that does not show up in normal circumstances. This ability comes from a part of the nervous system that regulates stress. When we feel pressure, the body releases stress chemicals that speed up the heart and narrow our thinking. This is why people panic or freeze or lash out. But a person who stays calm under pressure has a nervous system that does something different. Instead of spiraling, they engage something psychologists call cognitive control. It means their mind steps in and overrides the panic. Their thoughts stay organized. Their breathing stays steady. Their awareness stays open. They can actually think when everyone else is reacting. And that is a rare skill. You can see this in real life when something unexpected happens. Maybe a deadline gets moved up. Maybe plans fall apart. Maybe someone makes a huge mistake. Most people immediately shift into fear or frustration. But the calm person does something different. They pause. They observe the situation. They take in the details. They do not rush to conclusions. They do not let the moment control them. They control the moment. And that pause, that single moment of clarity, is often the difference between making things worse and turning everything around. What people often misunderstand is that staying calm does not mean they do not feel pressure. They feel it. They just do not let it drive them. They focus on what they can control instead of what they cannot. They break the problem into smaller steps. They keep their thoughts from running wild, and because they do that, they make smarter decisions when it matters most. It is a sign of a mind that refuses to drown in chaos. There is something deeply validating about this trait when you recognize it in yourself. Maybe you are the one who stays level-headed when friends are overwhelmed. Maybe you think clearly in emergencies. Maybe you do not get as emotional as others expect when things go wrong. You might have wondered why you are like that, or even questioned if it means you are too detached. But the truth is that staying calm under pressure is one of the strongest signs of emotional and cognitive intelligence. It shows that your mind does not get hijacked by intensity. It shows you have internal control. And most people do not. There is also a surprising advantage calm thinkers have. When they stay composed, they see opportunities hidden inside the chaos. Pressure makes most people tunnel-visioned. They cannot see anything except what is going wrong. But calm thinkers have a wide lens. They notice solutions others miss. They notice resources others forget they have. They notice the small shift that can change everything. That is why their decisions often look smart in hindsight. Their calm gave them access to information that stress blocked for everyone else. And this calmness does not just show up in crisis. It appears in social situations too. When tension rises in a group, calm people lower it. When someone tries to provoke them, they do not take the bait. When emotions escalate, they stay centered. People naturally follow them without even realizing it because calmness signals safety. The human brain reads calm behavior as competence. It is a survival instinct. We trust the person who is steady when things feel unstable. Something many people never realize is that calmness under pressure comes from experience. The calm person has either seen their fears come true and survived, or they have practiced holding themselves steady in difficult moments. Over time, their brain learns that panic does not help, but clarity does. And because they have learned that lesson, They can handle more than the average person can. That is why they look unshakable. They are not unshakable by nature. They built it. This trait even shows up in the way they speak. They do not rush their words. They do not ramble. They choose clarity over speed. Their voice stays controlled, not because they are trying to appear strong, but because their mind is not overwhelmed. The calmness on the outside is simply a reflection of what is happening inside. And here is the part that stands out most. When someone stays calm under pressure, they shift the entire environment around them. People breathe easier. People think clearer. People refocus. Calmness spreads just as quickly as panic does, but in the opposite direction. And the person who carries that calm becomes someone you naturally look to in the hardest moments, because you know their thinking will stay sharp even when yours is clouded. When you find someone who does this, you are looking at a rare kind of mind. A mind that stays steady in storms. A mind that can separate emotion from logic when it matters. A mind that thinks clearly when clarity is in short supply. And once you see that in someone, you understand exactly how powerful calmness really is. Give smart solutions. There is a certain moment when you watch someone solve a problem and you realize they are thinking on a completely different level. Not because they know everything, and not because they talk the loudest, but because the solution they give feels so clean, so obvious in hindsight, that it makes everyone else wonder how they missed it. Smart solutions do that. They turn something messy into something simple. And when a person consistently does this, it becomes impossible to ignore how sharp their mind really is. What makes this so surprising is that smart problem solvers rarely look like they are working hard. They do not panic. They do not over-explain. They do not drown everyone in complicated theories. They just take in the situation, sit with it for a moment, and then offer a direction that cuts straight through the chaos. It hits you the same way a puzzle piece suddenly fits after struggling with it for too long. That snap of clarity is the shock factor behind smart solutions. What allows someone to do this is something psychologists call mental modeling. It means they mentally map out what is happening, what the true problem is, and what consequences each choice will create. Most people treat the surface-level issue. Smart solvers dig deeper. They understand that the first thing you notice is rarely the real problem. They scan for patterns, motives, and root causes. And because they do that, their answer lands in the exact place where the issue actually lies. You can see this in everyday situations. Maybe a friend complains about constant stress at work. Everyone else suggests taking a break or venting. The smart solver listens and says something like, "It sounds like the workload is not the real issue. It is the lack of boundaries," and suddenly everything makes sense. Or maybe a group is stuck trying to fix a technical issue. People keep suggesting random steps. Then the smart solver takes a breath, identifies the actual bottleneck, and gives a solution that removes the problem at its core. It is not magic. It is precision. Here is the part most people never realize. Smart solutions often come from noticing what others ignore. The human brain filters out most information because it wants to take cognitive shortcuts. But someone who consistently gives sharp solutions notices the pieces other people skip. They hear the inconsistency in the story. They see the missing detail in the plan. They catch the assumption everyone else relied on. And because they catch the detail no one else thought mattered, they have access to an answer no one else could reach. There is something validating here for people who have always felt slightly out of sync with the way groups approach problems. Maybe you stay quiet at first because you are trying to understand the situation fully. Maybe you hesitate to jump in because you want to give an answer that actually works. Maybe you never liked quick fixes because they ignore the real cause. If that sounds like you, then you should know this is not slowness. This is depth. Your mind is building a bigger picture before you speak. That is why your solutions land differently. Another interesting thing about smart solvers is that they are not afraid of complexity. They do not run from it. They see complexity as a set of moving parts they can break down. When others get overwhelmed, they start organizing. They identify what matters and what does not. They remove emotional noise from the decision. They turn the overwhelming into the manageable. That ability requires strong working memory, emotional control, and logical reasoning all working together. You can also see this ability show up socially. When people come to them with emotional problems, they do not dismiss feelings. They listen for the pattern underneath the emotion. They notice the repeated behaviors, the repeated conflicts, the repeated fears. Then they offer a perspective that reframes the entire situation. They do not give advice to sound wise. They give advice that actually shifts the direction of the person's life. That is the power of a solution rooted in clarity, not impulse. There is also strategy behind the way smart solvers think. They do not just fix the immediate problem. They aim to prevent the problem from happening again. That mindset separates a temporary fix from a real solution. Most people want relief. Smart thinkers want transformation. They look at the long-term consequences, the side effects, the ripple effects. They see the problem not as a moment, but as a system. And when you see a problem as a system, you naturally give a more intelligent answer. One of the most striking parts of this trait is how calm smart problem solvers remain while everyone else spirals. They do not get lost in the drama. They focus on the structure, and that calmness gives them access to options nobody else can see. Stress narrows thinking. Calmness expands it. That expanded thinking is what produces answers that feel almost elegant. And here is something people rarely admit. When someone consistently gives smart solutions, others begin to rely on them. They become the person people look to, even subconsciously, when things get complicated. People trust them not because they are loud, but because their insight has proven itself again and again. That trust is earned through clarity, not ego. When someone gives solutions like this, you are looking at a mind that sees beyond the surface, a mind that is more analytical than it appears, a mind that can take tangled problems and turn them into something workable. And once you see that ability in someone, you understand exactly how intelligent they really are. Grasp ideas instantly. There is a moment you can almost feel when someone understands something the very second it is explained. You barely finish your sentence, and you can already see it in their eyes. They got it. Not later. Not after a long breakdown. Instantly. And that moment is always a little striking, because it makes you realize their mind is running on a different level of clarity. Most people need multiple explanations. They need examples. They need time. But the person who grasps ideas instantly seems to jump straight to the core truth without the extra steps. What shocks people most about this trait is how effortless it looks from the outside. They do not squint. They do not hesitate. They do not look confused for a second and then slowly catch on. Instead, the idea just lands in their mind as if it belongs there. You can almost watch the concept slide into place, and then they take it further. They start connecting it to other ideas, other experiences, other patterns. That is when you realize they did not just understand the idea, they absorbed it. There is a scientific reason behind instant understanding. The brain works by forming neural pathways, little roads that information travels through. When someone grasps ideas quickly, it means they already have a framework built inside their mind that the new idea can attach to. The information is not floating alone. It plugs into a network that already exists. This process is called associative learning, and it is one of the clearest indicators of intelligence. It means the person is not understanding ideas from scratch. They are updating an internal map that is already well developed. And you see this in the way they respond. You explain a new concept at work, and they immediately ask a question that shows they already see the deeper layers. You show them how to use a new tool, and they jump from beginner level to intermediate level almost instantly. You describe an emotional situation, and they understand the entire dynamic without needing every detail. It almost feels unfair, like they are skipping steps. But in reality, their brain has fewer steps to begin with because the connections are already built. This ability shows up early in conversations too. Some people need long explanations before they get your point. The fast grasper only needs the setup. They understand the meaning behind your words before you finish the thought. That does not mean they assume things. It means they recognize the pattern behind the idea. This is the same mental skill used in predicting outcomes, analyzing behavior, and learning at high speed. Their mind moves quickly because it works with structure rather than random pieces. There is something deeply validating about this for people who have always felt different in how they learn. Maybe classrooms bored you because you understood things long before the teacher finished explaining. Maybe you frustrated people because you asked deeper questions while they were still on the basics. Maybe you thought you were impatient when really your brain just did not need the slower pace. Fast understanding is not impatience or arrogance. It is efficiency, and it comes with a unique observational power. People who grasp ideas instantly do not only hear information, they absorb tone, context, and intention. They notice the shape of the idea, not just the words. They catch what is implied. They catch what is left out. That broader awareness allows the new idea to fit into a larger system of meaning. They are not just learning, they are interpreting. This is why they can apply new knowledge almost immediately. When they learn a new method, they can use it the same day. When they hear a powerful insight, they integrate it into their thinking instantly. When they understand a concept, they can explain it to someone else with no trouble. Their brain organizes ideas the same way a skilled musician organizes notes. Everything has a structure. Everything has a rhythm. Everything has a place. What makes this trait even more impressive is how calm it looks in the moment. There is no dramatic reaction, no long analysis, no visible struggle. Instant understanding feels peaceful. It feels like their brain knows exactly where to put the puzzle piece. And that calmness makes them appear more composed than others in fast-moving situations. When people around them get overwhelmed by new information, they stay steady. They can take in more without stress because they are not drowning in confusion. This ability also shows up in the social world. People who grasp ideas quickly often understand social dynamics faster than others. They pick up on hidden tensions. They sense motives. They notice the story behind actions. They do not need someone to explain every detail, because the patterns are familiar. They have seen variations of the same behavior, the same conflict, the same emotional loop. Their brain recognizes the shape immediately. There is a strategic advantage here too. Instant understanding helps with decision-making. If you can grasp the idea quickly, you can make faster and more accurate choices. You can avoid mistakes that come from misunderstanding. You can adapt to new situations without freezing. You can stay ahead in environments that reward quick thinking and flexibility. And the most overlooked part is that people who grasp ideas instantly rarely brag about it. They do not feel the need to. They think of fast understanding as normal because it is normal for them. But to everyone else, it is a clear sign that their mind is sharper, faster, and more connected than it appears. When you watch someone understand things instantly, you are seeing a mind that recognizes truth at high speed. A mind that does not get lost in unnecessary steps. A mind that builds meaning in seconds. And once you recognize that ability in someone, you understand just how exceptional their intelligence really is. Adapts easily. Some people walk into change like it barely registers as a threat. While others freeze, complain, or resist, they adjust almost instinctively. Plans shift, rules change, expectations flip overnight, and somehow they stay steady. Not rigid, not defensive, just fluid. And when you watch someone adapt that easily, there is a quiet realization that happens. This person is not just flexible. Their mind is operating at a higher level than it looks. What surprises most people is that adaptability does not look dramatic. It is not loud confidence or constant reinvention. It is subtle. You see it when something does not go as planned and they do not get emotionally stuck. They pause, reassess, and move forward with a new approach before others even finish reacting. That moment is shocking because it exposes how many people are mentally anchored to expectations they cannot let go of. The reason adaptability is such a strong sign of intelligence is rooted in how the brain handles uncertainty. Change triggers discomfort because it forces the brain to update its internal model of reality. Most people resist that update. They cling to what they already know because it feels safe. But someone who adapts easily has a brain that updates quickly. Psychologists call this cognitive flexibility. It is the ability to shift perspectives, strategies, and behavior without emotional overload. And it is one of the strongest predictors of problem solving and long-term success. You see this play out in everyday situations. A plan falls apart, and instead of blaming or panicking, they immediately ask what still works. A new environment feels unfamiliar, and instead of withdrawing, they start learning the rules of the space. A mistake happens, and instead of spiraling, they correct course and keep moving. This is not emotional detachment. This is emotional regulation paired with sharp thinking. They understand that resistance wastes energy, while adaptation creates options. What makes this even more impressive is how calm it looks. Adapting easily does not come with visible stress. Their tone stays steady. Their behavior stays intentional. They do not fight reality. They work with it. And because they do, they often end up ahead while others are still processing what went wrong. That gap in reaction time is not about speed alone. It is about mental clarity. There is something validating here if you recognize this trait in yourself. Maybe you have always been the one who adjusts while others struggle. Maybe you move on faster after disappointment. Maybe you are comfortable starting over or changing direction when necessary. And maybe people have mistaken that for a lack of attachment or seriousness. But the truth is, adaptability is not indifference. It is intelligence paired with resilience. It means you understand that clinging to the wrong situation costs more than letting it go. Adaptable people also have a unique way of learning. They treat new situations like data, not threats. When something unfamiliar happens, their first instinct is curiosity. What is different here? What still applies? What needs to change? That mindset keeps their brain open instead of defensive. And an open brain learns faster, adjusts faster, and recovers faster. This is why adaptable people often grow rapidly over time. They do not waste years resisting change that is inevitable anyway. You can also see this trait in social dynamics. Adaptable people read the room quickly. They adjust their communication style depending on who they are with. They know when to speak, when to listen, when to push, and when to step back. They do not cling to one identity in every situation. They understand that context matters. That flexibility allows them to navigate different personalities and environments with ease. It is social intelligence working quietly in the background. Another overlooked aspect of adaptability is how it protects mental health. When someone can adapt, setbacks do not feel like the end of the world. They feel like redirection. The brain does not catastrophize because it trusts its ability to adjust. That trust creates emotional stability. Instead of feeling trapped, adaptable people feel capable, and that sense of capability is incredibly powerful. It keeps them moving forward even when conditions are far from ideal. There is also a strategic advantage to this trait. In fast-changing environments, rigid thinkers fall behind quickly. The adaptable thinker stays relevant. They update their skills. They shift their approach. They abandon what no longer works without ego. That last part is important. Adaptability requires humility. It requires admitting that an old plan might be wrong. Intelligent minds are comfortable with that because they care more about outcomes than appearances. And here is something subtle but important. People who adapt easily do not tie their identity too tightly to any single role, belief, or outcome. That flexibility gives them freedom. If one path closes, they find another. If one strategy fails, they test a new one. They do not collapse when something changes because their sense of self is not dependent on everything staying the same. That is emotional maturity aligned with intelligence. Over time, this trait compounds. The adaptable person gains experience across more situations, more environments, more challenges. Each adaptation sharpens their instincts. Each change makes the next one easier. While others feel exhausted by constant shifts, the adaptable person becomes more capable with every adjustment. Change becomes familiar territory instead of a threat. When you see someone adapt easily, you are looking at a mind that understands reality as fluid, a mind that responds instead of resists, a mind that stays effective when conditions shift. And once you recognize that ability in someone, you understand that their intelligence is not just about knowing things. It is about staying capable no matter what changes around them. Catches inconsistencies. Some people hear a story and immediately feel that something does not quite line up. They cannot always explain it right away, but there is a quiet tension in their mind, like a loose thread they cannot ignore. While others nod along, this person pauses internally. A detail does not match. A timeline feels off. A reaction does not fit the situation. And that moment, when they sense the inconsistency before anyone else does, is one of the clearest signs of a sharp and disciplined mind. What makes this so surprising is how invisible the skill looks from the outside. Catching inconsistencies does not come with dramatic reactions or loud call-outs. Most of the time, it happens silently. The person keeps listening, keeps observing, keeps mentally comparing what is being said now to what was said before. And the shock comes later, when they point out the flaw so calmly and precisely that everyone else suddenly realizes they missed it completely. This ability exists because the brain is constantly building an internal model of reality. Every new piece of information either fits that model or challenges it. Most people unconsciously ignore small contradictions because questioning them requires mental effort and social risk. But someone who catches inconsistencies has a brain that refuses to gloss over mismatches. Their mind checks for coherence. It tracks details across time. It notices when something changes without explanation. That level of cognitive monitoring is not common, and it is deeply tied to intelligence. You can see this in conversations. Someone tells a story and later contradicts a detail they shared earlier. Most listeners forget the first version or assume they misheard. The sharp listener remembers. They notice the shift, or someone claims a belief but acts in a way that directly conflicts with it. Others focus on the words. The sharp mind notices the behavior. These inconsistencies stand out because the brain of an intelligent observer values alignment between logic, emotion, and action. What makes this trait even more powerful is that it applies everywhere. In work situations, they notice when a plan does not match the stated goal. In relationships, they notice when words and actions diverge. In arguments, they notice when someone changes definitions to win a point. In systems, they notice when outcomes repeat despite supposed fixes. Their brain is constantly asking one quiet question: does this actually make sense? And when the answer is no, they cannot unsee it. There is a psychological reason some people excel at this. Catching inconsistencies requires strong working memory and attention control. The brain must hold multiple pieces of information at once and compare them in real time. It also requires emotional regulation, because noticing contradictions often creates discomfort. Intelligent minds are more willing to sit with that discomfort instead of brushing it aside. They prioritize truth over ease, and that choice makes all the difference. This is deeply validating for people who have always felt bothered by things others ignore. Maybe you have been told you are too analytical or too skeptical. Maybe people get annoyed when you point out holes in plans or stories. But that discomfort you feel when something does not add up is not negativity. It is your mind protecting coherence. You are wired to notice when reality is being bent, intentionally or not. That is not a flaw. That is a sign of high-level thinking. Catching inconsistencies also creates a kind of quiet foresight. When you notice contradictions early, you can predict outcomes before they happen. You can tell when a promise will not be kept because the behavior does not support it. You can tell when a system will fail because the logic behind it is flawed. You can tell when a story will collapse because it cannot sustain itself. That foresight often looks like intuition to others, but it is really pattern comparison over time. This trait also explains why people who catch inconsistencies are often harder to manipulate. Manipulation relies on confusion, selective information, or emotional distraction. Someone who tracks details and remembers contradictions is difficult to fool. They notice when narratives shift. They remember what was said before. They ask follow-up questions that expose gaps. This is why intelligent people are often labeled as perceptive or hard to deceive. Their mind does not let things slide unnoticed. There is also a moral dimension to this skill. People who catch inconsistencies tend to value integrity, even if they do not consciously think about it that way. Consistency is a form of honesty. When words, actions, and intentions align, the brain relaxes. When they do not, the brain signals something is wrong. Intelligent minds pay attention to that signal. They do not suppress it to keep the peace. They may stay quiet, but they store the information. And when it matters, they act on it. You can even see this ability in how someone learns. They question explanations that contradict earlier lessons. They notice when a rule has exceptions that were never addressed. They spot flaws in logic that others memorize without understanding. This makes them stronger learners over time because they build knowledge on solid foundations instead of shaky ones. They do not just accept information. They test it for internal consistency. One of the most overlooked parts of this trait is how tiring it can be. Noticing inconsistencies means you are constantly aware of gaps, mismatches, and unresolved questions. It can feel isolating when others do not see what you see, but it also gives you clarity. While others live with vague confusion, you understand why something feels wrong. That understanding is power, even when it is uncomfortable. When someone catches inconsistencies naturally, you are looking at a mind that values truth, structure, and alignment. A mind that tracks reality carefully instead of passively absorbing it. A mind that sees through surface-level narratives and notices what actually holds together. And once you recognize that ability in someone, you understand that their intelligence runs far deeper than appearances ever suggest. Learns from mistakes. Some people make a mistake and carry it like a weight for years. Others make the same mistake again and again without ever understanding why. But then there is a third kind of person, and you can spot them quietly over time. They mess up, feel it fully, and then somehow come back sharper than before. The mistake does not harden them or break them, it teaches them. And once you notice this pattern, you realize you are looking at a very specific kind of intelligence. What surprises people most is that learning from mistakes does not look dramatic in the moment. There is no big speech, no visible transformation. Often, the person barely talks about it at all. They just adjust. Their behavior changes. Their decisions improve. And later, when a similar situation shows up, they handle it differently with almost unsettling precision. That is the shock factor. The lesson stuck. And most people never make their lessons stick. The reason this trait is so powerful lies in how the brain processes failure. When something goes wrong, the brain experiences discomfort, embarrassment, regret, frustration. Many people avoid that feeling at all costs. They rationalize. They blame others. They rewrite the story so they do not have to sit with the mistake. But someone who learns from mistakes does the opposite. They let the discomfort register. They analyze it. They ask what actually caused this. Not to punish themselves, but to understand. That willingness to face discomfort is a major sign of intelligence. There is a neurological mechanism behind this. When a mistake is acknowledged instead of avoided, the brain updates its internal model. It strengthens neural pathways associated with better decision-making. Psychologists call this error-based learning. It is one of the most effective ways humans improve, but it only works if the person stays mentally open instead of defensive. Intelligent minds are more likely to stay open because they care about accuracy more than ego. You can see this trait in small, everyday moments. Someone misreads a social situation and later adjusts how they communicate. Someone makes a poor financial choice and becomes more strategic instead of more fearful. Someone fails at a task and changes their approach rather than giving up. They do not repeat the same mistake with the same confidence. They evolve, and evolution is intelligence in motion. This is deeply validating for people who have always felt like mistakes hit them harder than others. Maybe you replay your errors in your mind. Maybe you feel embarrassed longer than you think you should. Maybe you analyze what went wrong even when no one else seems to care. That does not mean you are weak. It means your brain is extracting information. You are turning experience into insight. That process can feel heavy, but it is also what makes you grow faster than people who shrug and move on unchanged. People who learn from mistakes also show a unique kind of humility. They do not assume they are always right. They expect to be wrong sometimes, and because of that, they pay attention when reality corrects them. This humility is not insecurity. It is intellectual honesty. It allows them to update beliefs, strategies, and behaviors instead of clinging to what failed. Over time, this makes them far more competent than people who protect their pride at all costs. There is also an emotional intelligence component here. Learning from mistakes requires emotional regulation. You have to tolerate shame without collapsing into it. You have to feel regret without letting it turn into self-hatred. You have to accept responsibility without turning it into an identity. People who can do that have strong internal balance. They are able to separate who they are from what they did. That separation is crucial. It allows the mistake to be a teacher instead of a verdict. You often see this trait in leaders, even if they never call themselves that. When something goes wrong, they do not hide it or deny it. They quietly correct course. They adjust systems. They prevent the same error from happening again. They understand that repeating mistakes is more damaging than admitting them. That mindset builds trust, even when no one explicitly talks about it. People feel safer around someone who learns, because it means growth is happening. This trait also explains why some people improve at an incredible pace. They do not need success to learn. Failure teaches them just as much, sometimes more. Every mistake adds data. Every misstep sharpens judgment. Over time, they develop instincts that look almost prophetic. But those instincts were built through trial, error, and reflection. They earned that clarity. Another subtle sign is how these people respond to feedback. They do not automatically reject it or absorb it blindly. They evaluate it. They look for the truth inside it. Even criticism becomes useful information. That does not mean it never hurts. It does. But the pain becomes productive instead of paralyzing. That ability to turn emotional friction into forward movement is rare. And here is something people often miss. Learning from mistakes does not mean never making them again. It means not making the same mistake for the same reason. The intelligent learner understands context. They know life is complex, but they also know patterns. And once they recognize a pattern that led to failure, they interrupt it. That interruption is growth. When you see someone who consistently learns from mistakes, you are looking at a mind that refuses to stagnate, a mind that values truth over comfort, a mind that turns experience into wisdom instead of scars. And once you recognize that trait, you understand that their intelligence is not just about thinking well. It is about becoming better every time reality pushes back. Simplifies complexity. Some people can step into a situation that feels overwhelming, tangled, and confusing, and within minutes they make it feel manageable. Not because they ignore the complexity, but because they see through it. While everyone else is drowning in details, they calmly pull out the core idea and place it right in front of you. And when that happens, there is a strange sense of relief, followed by a quiet realization: this person is far smarter than they look. What shocks most people is that simplifying complexity does not look like effort. There is no visible struggle, no frantic note-taking, no long explanations filled with jargon. Instead, the person pauses, thinks, and then explains the situation in a way that suddenly makes everything click. You feel it in your body when it happens. Your shoulders relax, your mind clears. You go from confused to focused in seconds. That shift is not accidental. It is the result of a mind that understands structure deeply. The reason this ability stands out so much is because most people do the opposite when faced with complexity. They add more words, more rules, more explanations. They confuse movement with progress. But intelligent simplifiers do not add. They subtract. They remove what does not matter. They separate signal from noise, and that takes real mental discipline. It requires understanding what is essential and what is just decoration. There is a cognitive reason behind this. The human brain can only hold a limited amount of information at once. When complexity exceeds that limit, thinking breaks down. People panic or disengage, but someone who can simplify understands this limitation intuitively. They reorganize information into clear chunks. Psychologists call this cognitive compression. It means taking many moving parts and reducing them into a smaller number of meaningful ideas. That process is one of the strongest indicators of intelligence because it shows mastery, not memorization. You see this in how they explain things. Instead of listing every detail, they start with the principle that governs everything else. They give you the framework before the facts. Once you understand the framework, the details fall into place on their own. This is why their explanations feel clean and satisfying. They do not overwhelm you. They empower you to understand. This trait shows up everywhere. In work settings, they turn complicated projects into clear steps. In conversations, they translate abstract ideas into relatable language. In arguments, they strip away emotion and focus on the real issue. In learning, they grasp the underlying concept instead of memorizing surface-level information. They are not simplifying because they lack depth. They are simplifying because they have depth. There is something validating here. If you have ever felt the urge to make things simpler when everyone else wanted to make them more complicated, maybe you have been told you are oversimplifying or missing nuance. But often, what people call oversimplification is actually clarity. True simplification does not ignore nuance. It organizes it. It puts complexity into a structure the mind can work with. And that ability is rare. People who simplify complexity also have a unique kind of confidence. They do not need to prove how much they know. They are not impressed by complicated language or unnecessary detail. They care about understanding and effectiveness. This is why their ideas tend to spread. People repeat what they say. People remember it, because the human brain loves clarity. It trusts the person who makes things understandable. There is also a strategic advantage here. When you can simplify, you can act faster. You can make decisions without getting stuck in analysis paralysis. You can prioritize correctly. You can see what actually moves the needle. While others debate endlessly, the simplifier moves forward with intention. That is why they often end up leading, even if they never ask to. This ability is especially powerful in moments of stress. Under pressure, complexity feels even heavier. Emotions cloud judgment. Information overload shuts people down, but the person who simplifies complexity becomes invaluable. They anchor the group. They remind everyone what matters right now. They reduce chaos into direction. Calm follows clarity, and clarity follows simplification. What most people never realize is that this trait comes from deep understanding. You cannot simplify what you do not understand. If someone can explain a complex idea in simple terms, it means they see it clearly from the inside out. They know how the pieces fit together. They know which parts are fundamental and which are optional. That is not surface intelligence. That is mastery. You also see this trait in how they think internally. Their mind is organized. They do not carry unnecessary mental clutter. They question assumptions. They discard ideas that do not serve the goal. They refine their thinking over time. This internal clarity makes them resilient. When life gets complicated, they do not feel lost. They know how to find the center of the problem and work outward. Another subtle sign is how patient they are with confusion in others. They do not mock it. They do not rush people. They remember what it feels like to not understand yet. And because they understand the structure so well, they can guide others through it without frustration. Teaching comes naturally to them, even if they never set out to teach. When someone consistently simplifies complexity, you are looking at a mind that sees order where others see chaos. A mind that values clarity over ego. A mind that understands deeply enough to make things feel easy. And once you notice that ability in someone, you understand that their intelligence is not about knowing more. It is about understanding better. Reads emotions well. Some people can walk into a room and instantly sense the emotional temperature without a single word being spoken. They know who feels uncomfortable, who is pretending to be fine, who is holding something back, and who is about to explode, all within seconds. It is subtle, almost invisible, but once you notice it, you realize how powerful it is. Reading emotions well is one of the clearest signs of intelligence that hides in plain sight. What shocks most people is that emotional awareness like this is not about being overly sensitive or dramatic. In fact, it is usually the opposite. The people who read emotions best are often calm, grounded, and observant. They are not overwhelmed by feelings. They are curious about them. While others focus only on what is being said, these people pay attention to what is being felt. And that extra layer of awareness gives them access to information most people never notice. There is a biological reason behind this ability. The human brain is wired to pick up emotional signals through facial expressions, tone of voice, posture, and micro-reactions. Most people register these signals unconsciously, but do not analyze them. Someone who reads emotions well does something different. Their brain slows down and integrates these signals into meaning. They notice patterns in behavior. They catch subtle shifts in mood. They sense emotional mismatches. That level of processing requires attention, memory, and empathy working together. That combination is a form of intelligence. You can see this skill show up in conversations. Someone says they are fine, but their voice is tight and their eyes avoid contact. The emotionally sharp person knows they are not fine. Someone laughs at the wrong moment. Someone agrees too quickly. Someone withdraws just slightly. These details might seem insignificant, but together they paint a clear emotional picture. The person who reads emotions well does not need confirmation. They already understand what is happening beneath the surface. What makes this even more surprising is that this ability often exists in people who do not talk much. They listen. They watch. they give space, and because they are not busy pushing their own agenda. They notice what others miss. They sense tension before it becomes conflict. They feel discomfort before it turns into distance. They recognize fear before it turns into anger. That kind of foresight is emotional intelligence in action. This trait is deeply validating for people who have always felt tuned into others. Maybe you notice mood changes instantly. Maybe you can tell when someone is lying to themselves even if you never say it out loud. Maybe you feel emotional shifts before words catch up. And maybe you have wondered if that makes you too sensitive. But the truth is, reading emotions well is not weakness. It is perception. Your brain is picking up real data and interpreting it accurately. There is also a psychological explanation for why this ability matters so much. Emotions drive behavior far more than logic does. People make decisions based on how they feel, then justify them with reasons later. Someone who understands emotions understands motivation. They know why people act the way they do. They know when logic will work and when it will not. That insight allows them to communicate more effectively, resolve conflicts more smoothly, and avoid unnecessary damage in relationships. You see this play out in how emotionally intelligent people respond. When someone is upset, they do not rush to fix or argue. They acknowledge the feeling first. When someone is defensive, they do not push harder. They soften their approach. When someone feels insecure, they offer reassurance without being asked. These responses are not accidental. They come from accurately reading what the other person needs emotionally in that moment. There is also a protective side to this trait. People who read emotions well are harder to deceive. They notice when enthusiasm feels forced. They sense when kindness has strings attached. They recognize when someone is hiding resentment behind politeness. Emotional inconsistencies stand out to them the same way logical inconsistencies stand out to analytical thinkers. This protects them from manipulation and unhealthy dynamics, even if they cannot always explain why something feels off. This skill also shows up in leadership, even in formal leadership. People naturally gravitate toward those who understand them. When someone feels seen without being judged, trust forms quickly. Emotional readers create that trust instinctively. They make others feel understood. That feeling is powerful. It lowers defenses. It opens communication. It creates loyalty. That is why emotionally intelligent people often become the quiet center of groups, even if they never seek authority. Another overlooked aspect of reading emotions well is how it helps with self-control. When you understand emotions, you are less likely to be controlled by them. You recognize what you are feeling and why. You can pause instead of reacting. You can choose responses instead of defaulting to impulse. This internal awareness strengthens decision-making and reduces regret. It is intelligence turned inward. Of course, this ability can be tiring. Constantly picking up on emotional signals can feel heavy, especially in chaotic environments. You may feel things before others do. You may carry emotional information that no one else notices or acknowledges. But that does not make the skill less valuable. It makes it more rare. And like any powerful ability, it requires boundaries and self-awareness to use well. When someone reads emotions well, you are looking at a mind that understands the invisible forces shaping human behavior. A mind that sees beyond words into intention and feeling. A mind that navigates social reality with accuracy instead of guesswork. And once you recognize that ability in someone, you realize their intelligence is not just about thinking clearly. It is about understanding people deeply. thinks long term. Some people make decisions based on how something feels right now. Others make decisions based on how something will feel months or years from now, and you can usually tell the difference long before the outcome arrives. The person who thinks long-term moves differently. They are less reactive, less impulsive, less impressed by short-term rewards, and when you watch them closely, you realize their intelligence is not flashy. It is strategic. What shocks most people is that long-term thinkers often look slower at first. They do not rush into excitement. They do not jump at every opportunity. They hesitate in moments where others leap. And that hesitation is often misunderstood. People assume they are unsure or overly cautious. But in reality, their mind is already several steps ahead, quietly running scenarios that others never consider. There is a psychological reason behind this. The brain naturally favors immediate rewards because they are easier to process. Delayed outcomes require imagination, self-control, and mental simulation. Someone who thinks long-term has a brain that can project forward. They can picture consequences. They can feel the weight of future outcomes, even when nothing has happened yet. That ability is linked to advanced executive function, the part of the brain responsible for planning, impulse control, and strategic thinking. You see this trait clearly in how they handle temptation. While others chase quick wins, long-term thinkers ask what the cost will be later. Not just financially, but emotionally, socially, and mentally. They are willing to endure short-term discomfort to avoid long-term damage. That might look like discipline, but it is actually foresight. They are not denying themselves. They are choosing their future. This becomes especially noticeable in relationships. A long-term thinker pays attention to patterns instead of promises. They do not get swept away by intensity alone. They ask quiet questions in their mind. How does this person handle stress? How do they treat others when no one is watching? How do they deal with responsibility? They understand that character reveals itself over time, not in moments. That perspective protects them from mistakes that feel exciting now but painful later. There is something deeply validating about this if you recognize it in yourself. Maybe you have been told you overthink or take life too seriously. Maybe people tease you for planning ahead or being cautious. But thinking long-term is not fear. It is wisdom in motion. You are not missing out. You are optimizing your future. And that takes intelligence most people do not develop until consequences force them to. Long-term thinkers also respond differently to setbacks. They do not see failure as the end of the story. They see it as a chapter. Because they think in extended timelines, a temporary loss does not define them. They ask what this experience will teach them and how it fits into the bigger picture. That mindset builds resilience. It prevents emotional whiplash. It keeps them grounded when things do not go their way. This trait shows up strongly in how they use time. They value consistency over intensity. They know small actions repeated over time outperform dramatic bursts of effort. They invest in habits. They build systems. They understand compounding not just in money, but in skills, health, trust, and reputation. While others wait for motivation, long-term thinkers rely on structure, and that structure quietly carries them further. You can also see this intelligence in how they speak. They rarely make absolute statements. They avoid emotional extremes. They leave room for change because they understand that life evolves. They think in probabilities, not guarantees. That flexible realism allows them to adjust without losing direction. They are not rigid. They are prepared. There is a subtle emotional maturity tied to this trait as well. Long-term thinkers can tolerate boredom, uncertainty, and delayed gratification. They do not need constant stimulation or validation. They can sit with discomfort if it serves a future goal. That ability separates those who build meaningful lives from those who chase constant relief. It is not glamorous, but it is powerful. Another overlooked aspect of thinking long-term is how it shapes decision-making under pressure. When faced with a choice, long-term thinkers ask one quiet question: which option leaves me in a better position later? Not just tomorrow, but years from now. That question filters out many bad decisions instantly. It simplifies complexity. It anchors them when emotions run high. People who think long-term are also harder to manipulate. Short-term thinkers can be swayed by urgency, fear, or reward. Long-term thinkers pause. They recognize pressure tactics. They do not let artificial deadlines override thoughtful judgment. They understand that most things worth having do not disappear overnight. That awareness gives them control. Over time, this way of thinking compounds into something remarkable. Long-term thinkers often end up healthier, more skilled, more stable, and more fulfilled. Not because they are lucky, but because their choices align with where they want to end up. They build quietly while others cycle through peaks and crashes. And here is the part most people miss. Thinking long-term does not mean you are cold or detached from the present. It means you respect the present enough to not sabotage the future. It means you understand that every small decision is a vote for the life you are building. That awareness is intelligence expressed through patience. When you notice someone thinking long-term, you are looking at a mind that sees beyond the moment, a mind that understands cause and effect across time, a mind that values sustainability over excitement. And once you recognize that ability in someone, you realize their intelligence is not about quick answers. It is about lasting outcomes. Connects unrelated ideas. Some people hear two completely separate ideas and immediately sense a hidden link between them. At first it sounds random, almost strange. You wonder how they even jumped there. But then they explain it, and suddenly everything clicks. The connection feels obvious in hindsight, yet no one else saw it coming. That moment always lands the same way. You realize this person is thinking on a level that does not follow straight lines. Their intelligence moves sideways, diagonally, and sometimes in leaps that feel almost impossible to track. What shocks people most about this trait is how unpredictable it looks. The person might bring up an example from a totally different field, a personal story, or an abstract concept that seems unrelated to the topic at hand. At first, it feels like a detour. Then the connection lands, and it reframes the entire conversation. That shock comes from watching a mind bridge gaps others never even noticed existed. This ability comes from something psychologists call associative thinking. It is the brain's capacity to link ideas that are stored far apart. Most people think in categories. This idea belongs here. That experience belongs there. But someone who connects unrelated ideas has a brain that allows information to mix. Concepts are not locked in boxes. They are free to interact. When a new idea appears, their brain scans across different domains, memories, and patterns to find resonance. That is not random thinking. That is creative intelligence. You can see this in how they solve problems. While others stay trapped within the usual rules, this person pulls in insights from unexpected places. A business problem reminds them of a social dynamic. A relationship issue reminds them of a system breakdown. A technical challenge reminds them of something from nature or art. These comparisons are not shallow metaphors. They reveal structural similarities. They expose the deeper pattern both situations share. What makes this trait so powerful is that innovation lives here. Every major breakthrough comes from connecting ideas that were not previously linked. Science borrows from philosophy. Technology borrows from biology. Art borrows from mathematics. The mind that connects unrelated ideas is the mind that creates new possibilities instead of recycling old ones. That is why this trait often belongs to people who seem unconventional or hard to categorize themselves. There is something validating here if you have always thought differently. Maybe your mind jumps around. Maybe you see links others dismiss as irrelevant. Maybe people tell you that you are off topic or overthinking. But often, what they call off topic is actually ahead of the conversation. You are not losing focus. You are expanding the frame. And expansion is intelligence expressing itself creatively. This ability also explains why some people are incredibly good at explaining complex ideas. They can translate one concept into another by drawing parallels. They meet people where they are mentally by using familiar references. That makes their explanations memorable. The human brain learns best through association. When you link something new to something already understood, learning accelerates. People who connect unrelated ideas do this naturally. You can also see this trait in humor. Clever humor almost always relies on unexpected connections. Two ideas collide in a way you did not anticipate, and your brain lights up. That surprise creates laughter. It is the same mechanism at work, the ability to connect distant concepts quickly. That is why many intelligent people have a sharp or unusual sense of humor. Their mind moves fast across categories. There is a neurological explanation for this as well. Brains that connect unrelated ideas tend to have strong communication between different regions. Information flows freely instead of staying isolated. This flexibility allows insights to emerge spontaneously. That is why connections sometimes appear suddenly, almost out of nowhere. In reality, the brain has been working quietly in the background, linking patterns until they surface into awareness. This trait also shows up emotionally. People who connect ideas well can understand others by relating unfamiliar experiences to something they already know. They build empathy through analogy. They do not need to live the same life to understand someone. They find emotional parallels. That makes them deeply perceptive and often comforting to talk to. They see the shared human pattern beneath different circumstances. Another overlooked aspect of this ability is how it helps with adaptation. When faced with a new challenge, the person who connects unrelated ideas can borrow strategies from past situations that look nothing alike on the surface. They recognize transferable skills. They reuse lessons in creative ways. While others feel stuck because the situation feels new, this person feels capable because they recognize the underlying structure. This kind of thinking can make someone appear scattered or unconventional. Their thoughts do not follow the expected order. But beneath that surface is a mind that sees networks instead of straight paths. They understand that reality is not linear. Everything influences everything else. When they connect ideas, they are mapping that hidden web. Over time, this ability compounds into wisdom. The more experiences they have, the richer their network of ideas becomes. Each new insight has more places to connect. That is why these people often become more insightful with age, not less. Their mind becomes a dense web of meaning where insights can travel quickly from one area to another. When you see someone connect unrelated ideas effortlessly, you are watching a mind that operates beyond boundaries. A mind that creates instead of imitates. A mind that sees unity where others see separation. And once you recognize that ability in someone, you understand that their intelligence is not just about knowing facts. It is about weaving meaning from places most people never think to look. Absorbs info effortlessly. You have probably met someone like this before. You explain something once, casually, without much effort, and they get it. Not just the surface, but the whole thing. They do not ask you to repeat it. They do not need step-by-step guidance. They just nod, maybe ask one sharp clarification, and move on, already understanding what took others weeks to figure out. It feels almost unfair to watch. And yet, it is one of the clearest signs of real intelligence. What shocks most people is that effortless learning often looks passive. The person does not appear to be trying hard. They are not furiously taking notes or stressing over every detail. In fact, they may look relaxed, even distracted. But inside, their mind is actively organizing information, filtering what matters, and connecting it to what they already know. The effort is invisible, which makes the results surprising. The reason this happens is not because they have a better memory in the traditional sense. It is because they understand how information fits together. Their brain looks for structure first. Instead of memorizing isolated facts, they identify the underlying concept, the logic, or the pattern. Once they see that, the details attach themselves naturally. This is why the information sticks. It has a place to live. Psychologically, this ability is linked to something called deep encoding. When the brain understands meaning, it stores information more efficiently. Most people learn shallowly. They try to remember words, steps, or instructions exactly as presented. Someone who absorbs information effortlessly translates what they hear into their own mental language. They rephrase it internally. They visualize it. They connect it to previous experiences. That process happens quickly and automatically for them. You can see this trait clearly in conversations. You might casually mention a concept, a book, or a new idea, and days later they bring it up again with insight that surprises you. Not only did they remember it, they thought about it. They integrated it. They made it part of their understanding of the world. That is not passive listening. That is active absorption. This can be deeply validating if you recognize yourself here. Maybe you have always picked things up quickly without knowing why. Maybe teachers assumed you were not trying because you did not struggle visibly. Maybe others felt threatened by how easily you learned and labeled it as luck. But effortless learning is not luck. It is a sign that your brain is efficient, curious, and pattern-oriented. Another important part of this trait is curiosity. People who absorb information easily are genuinely interested in understanding how things work. Curiosity keeps the brain open. When information arrives, it is welcomed instead of resisted. There is no internal fight, no anxiety about being wrong, just interest. And interest accelerates learning more than effort ever could. This ability also explains why some people are excellent self-learners. They do not need structured environments or constant instruction. Give them raw information, and they will organize it themselves. They know how to ask the right questions internally. What is the point of this? How does this relate to what I already know? Why does this matter? Those questions guide absorption automatically. There is also a calming confidence that comes with this trait. When you trust your ability to understand things quickly, you are less afraid of new challenges. You are not intimidated by unfamiliar topics. You assume you will figure it out. That mindset creates a positive feedback loop. Confidence leads to exploration. Exploration leads to learning. Learning reinforces confidence. You may notice that people who absorb information effortlessly are also good at switching contexts. They can jump from one subject to another without feeling overwhelmed. That is because they are not carrying unnecessary mental clutter. They extract the essence of what they learn and discard the rest. Their mind stays light. That lightness makes learning feel easy. This trait also shows up under pressure. When others freeze because there is too much to process, these people remain clear. They can quickly scan information, identify what matters, and act. This is especially noticeable in fast-paced environments where decisions need to be made quickly. Their brain does not panic. It prioritizes. What most people do not realize is that effortless absorption is built on attention. Not forced attention, but selective attention. These individuals know where to focus. They tune out irrelevant noise. They listen for meaning rather than words. That selective focus allows their brain to conserve energy and process information efficiently. There can be a downside to this trait if it is not understood. Because learning feels easy, others may underestimate the intelligence behind it. They assume the person did not work for it. They may expect constant performance without rest, but even efficient minds need recovery. Effortless does not mean limitless. It means optimized. Over time, this ability compounds dramatically. The more information you absorb, the more connections you can make. Each new idea has multiple anchors. Learning becomes faster with each pass. That is why people with this trait often seem to accelerate ahead of others as time goes on. They are not just learning more. They are learning smarter. When you see someone absorb information effortlessly, you are watching a mind that understands how to learn, not just what to learn. A mind that organizes reality into meaning. A mind that turns exposure into understanding with minimal friction. And once you recognize that ability, you understand that their intelligence is not loud or dramatic. It is quiet, efficient, and incredibly powerful. Shows self-awareness. Some people understand the world, but a smaller group understands themselves. And when you meet someone in that second group, it feels different right away. They move with intention. They respond instead of react. They do not seem confused by their own emotions or blindsided by their own behavior. That quiet clarity is not accidental. It is one of the strongest signs of intelligence that rarely gets talked about. What surprises most people is that self-awareness does not look confident in the loud, polished way we usually imagine. In fact, it often looks humble. A self-aware person is comfortable admitting when they are wrong. They can acknowledge their flaws without collapsing or defending themselves. They can say things like, "I overreacted," or "I was projecting," or "I let my fear drive that decision." And when you hear that, it catches you off guard. Most people cannot do that without feeling threatened. The reason this is so rare is because self-awareness requires the ability to observe your own mind while you are inside it. Psychologically, this is called metacognition. It means thinking about your own thinking. Most people live on autopilot. They feel something and immediately justify it. They act and then rationalize it. A self-aware person pauses and asks, what is actually happening inside me right now? That pause is where intelligence lives. You can see this trait clearly during conflict. When emotions rise, most people become their emotions. Anger speaks through them. Ego takes control. Fear drives the conversation. But a self-aware person notices the emotion as it appears. They recognize when they are triggered. They understand where that trigger comes from. That awareness gives them choice. They can still feel strongly, but they are not hijacked by it. This can be deeply validating if you recognize it in yourself. Maybe you have always reflected on your reactions after the fact. Maybe you replay conversations, not to punish yourself, but to understand what you could do better next time. Maybe you are aware of your patterns, your blind spots, your emotional habits. And maybe you have wondered why that feels so heavy sometimes. The truth is, awareness adds responsibility, but it also adds power. Self-aware people understand their strengths and their limits. They do not overestimate themselves, and they do not underestimate themselves either. They know what environments bring out their best and which ones drain them. They know what kinds of people trigger old wounds. They know when they need space and when they need challenge. That knowledge allows them to design a life that actually fits them, instead of forcing themselves into roles that slowly break them. There is also a strong emotional intelligence component here. When you understand your own emotions, you become better at understanding others. You recognize projection when you see it. You notice when a reaction is more about the past than the present. You respond with curiosity instead of judgment. That makes self-aware people safer to be around. Conversations with them feel grounded. You feel heard without being analyzed. What shocks people is that self-awareness often comes from pain. Many self-aware individuals did not start out this way. They became this way because they had to. They questioned themselves after mistakes. They reflected after losses. They looked inward when blaming others stopped working. Over time, that habit of reflection sharpened their understanding. What once felt uncomfortable became a source of strength. This trait also shows up in how they receive feedback. Most people hear feedback as a threat. A self-aware person hears information. They do not assume every criticism is true, but they also do not dismiss it automatically. They ask, what part of this is mine to own? That ability to separate ego from growth is a major marker of intelligence. It allows constant refinement instead of stagnation. Another overlooked sign of self-awareness is emotional regulation. When you understand your internal landscape, you can manage it more effectively. You know when you are hungry, tired, overstimulated, or emotionally overloaded. You do not shame yourself for it. You adjust. That keeps small issues from turning into big problems. It also prevents you from hurting others unintentionally. Self-aware people are also more authentic. They are not constantly trying to perform or impress. They know who they are and who they are not. That clarity reduces internal conflict. They do not chase identities that do not align with their values. They make decisions based on self-knowledge rather than external pressure. That alignment creates calm. There is a cognitive advantage here as well. When you are aware of your biases, you can correct for them. When you know your emotional tendencies, you can factor them into decisions. That makes your thinking more accurate. You are not pretending to be objective. You are accounting for your subjectivity. That honesty leads to better judgment. Of course, self-awareness is not always comfortable. It means you cannot hide from yourself. It means you notice when you are being unfair, avoidant, defensive, or insecure. But that discomfort is temporary. The freedom it creates is lasting. You stop repeating the same mistakes. You stop being confused by your own behavior. You start acting with intention instead of impulse. Over time, this trait compounds quietly. Self-aware people grow faster because they learn from every experience. They do not waste years blaming circumstances or other people. They adjust, they evolve, they become more precise versions of themselves. And while others may not notice the process, they notice the results. When someone shows self-awareness, you are looking at a mind that is honest with itself, a mind that can reflect without collapsing, a mind that understands that growth starts inward. And once you recognize that ability in someone, you understand that their intelligence is not just about processing information. It is about understanding themselves deeply enough to change. Predicts outcomes. Some people seem to know how things will play out before they actually happen. Not in a dramatic, fortune-teller way, but in a quiet, grounded way that feels unsettlingly accurate. They warn you about an outcome, you brush it off, and weeks later you realize they were right. Not because they guessed, but because they saw what you did not. The ability to predict outcomes is one of the clearest signs of intelligence that often goes unnoticed until it proves itself. What surprises most people is that outcome prediction does not come from optimism or pessimism. It comes from pattern recognition. These individuals are not imagining the future. They are extending the present forward. They look at behaviors, incentives, past patterns, and human nature, then mentally press fast forward. While others focus on intentions, they focus on trajectories, and trajectories tell the truth long before results show up. This ability often shocks people because it feels effortless. The person does not need hours of analysis. They do not need spreadsheets or detailed forecasts. They just see where things are headed. When asked how they knew, they struggle to explain it clearly because the process is intuitive. Their brain has already connected the dots subconsciously. The conclusion arrives fully formed. Psychologically, this skill is rooted in something called probabilistic thinking. Instead of seeing the world in absolutes, outcome predictors think in likelihoods. They understand that behavior tends to repeat, that systems resist sudden change, that incentives shape decisions more than words do. They know that emotions drive actions, even when logic says otherwise. When you understand these principles, outcomes become easier to anticipate. You see this trait clearly in relationships. While others get caught up in charm, promises, or potential, outcome predictors pay attention to consistency. They notice how someone handles stress, responsibility, and accountability. They do not ask what could happen. They ask what usually happens. That distinction protects them from heartbreak and wasted time. They do not need things to fall apart to see the cracks forming. There is something validating here. If you have ever been told you are negative or overthinking when you tried to warn someone, maybe you saw an outcome coming and felt dismissed. Maybe people said you were assuming the worst when you were actually observing patterns. Predicting outcomes is not cynicism. It is realism sharpened by attention. You are not expecting failure. You are recognizing probability. This skill also shows up strongly in decision-making. Outcome predictors naturally ask what happens next, and then what happens after that. They follow the chain reaction. While others choose based on immediate comfort, they consider second and third order effects. That is a level of thinking most people never slow down enough to do, and it makes a massive difference in results. There is a neurological component here as well. The brain is constantly trying to predict the future based on past information. But for most people, emotion interferes with accuracy. Hope, fear, attachment, and ego distort prediction. Intelligent outcome predictors are better at separating emotion from observation. They notice how they feel, but they do not let it override the data. That emotional regulation sharpens foresight. This trait becomes especially valuable in high-pressure environments. When things move fast, there is no time to wait and see. Someone who can anticipate outcomes can act early, adjust course, and prevent damage. They do not need certainty. They need enough clarity to move intelligently. That ability often makes them appear decisive and composed when others feel overwhelmed. You can also see this skill in how they give advice. They rarely tell you what you want to hear. They tell you what is likely to happen. And even when it is uncomfortable, their advice tends to age well. Time proves them right more often than not. That is not arrogance. That is pattern literacy. Another overlooked aspect of outcome prediction is how it influences self-control. When you can accurately imagine the future consequences of your actions, temptation loses power. You are less likely to sabotage yourself for short-term relief. You know exactly how that choice will feel later. That clarity makes discipline easier because the future feels real, not abstract. Outcome predictors are also less surprised by life. That does not mean they are never disappointed. It means they are rarely blindsided. They expect resistance. They anticipate obstacles. They plan for human behavior instead of ideal scenarios. That preparation creates resilience. When things go wrong, they adjust instead of collapsing. This ability can sometimes feel isolating. Watching outcomes form while others remain hopeful can be frustrating. You may feel like you are carrying information no one wants to hear yet. You may hesitate to speak up because you know how it sounds. But foresight is not meant to isolate you. It is meant to guide you. Even when others ignore the signs, you can still act in alignment with what you see. Over time, this trait compounds into wisdom. Each prediction tested against reality refines accuracy. You learn which signals matter and which ones do not. Your internal model of the world becomes sharper. You do not rely on guesswork. You rely on accumulated understanding. That is intelligence built through attention and reflection. What most people never realize is that predicting outcomes is not about being right all the time. It is about being directionally correct often enough to make better choices. It is about reducing regret. It is about moving through life with eyes open instead of hoping things magically work out. When you see someone consistently predicting outcomes accurately, you are looking at a mind that understands cause and effect deeply. A mind that sees beyond the moment into motion. A mind that respects reality enough to learn from it. And once you recognize that ability in someone, you understand that their intelligence is not reactive. It is anticipatory. Asks follow-up questions. There is a moment in conversation that quietly reveals how sharp someone really is. You finish explaining something. Most people nod, maybe comment, maybe move on. But one person pauses, tilts their head slightly, and asks a follow-up question that goes straight to the heart of what you just said. Not surface level. Not polite filler. Something that makes you stop and think. That moment is subtle, but it is powerful. Asking follow-up questions is one of the clearest signs of intelligence hiding in plain sight. What surprises people is that follow-up questions are not about curiosity alone. They are about comprehension. A smart follow-up shows that the person was not just listening to respond. They were listening to understand. They absorbed the structure of what you said, noticed what was missing, and identified where clarity or depth was needed. That kind of listening is rare, and when you experience it, you feel it immediately. The shock comes from how precise these questions are. They do not ask for repetition. They do not derail the conversation. They advance it. They expose assumptions. They reveal implications. They uncover layers you did not even realize were there. Suddenly, the conversation shifts from casual exchange to something meaningful. That shift happens because one mind is actively engaging with another. Psychologically, asking strong, follow-up questions requires working memory, attention, and analytical thinking operating together. The person has to hold what you said in their mind, evaluate it in real time, and then generate a question that adds value. Most people lose track halfway through. Their mind drifts, or they focus on what they want to say next. Someone who asks good follow-ups stays present all the way through. You can see this trait clearly in learning environments. A student who asks follow-up questions is not confused. They are integrating. They want to understand how one idea connects to another. They want to know why something works, not just how. Their questions reveal depth of processing. Teachers often recognize this instinctively. A good follow-up question tells them the student is thinking beyond the page. This trait is deeply validating if you recognize it in yourself. Maybe you have always asked questions that made people pause. Maybe you were told you were overthinking or being too detailed. Maybe you noticed that shallow answers never satisfied you. That is not because you are difficult. It is because your mind wants coherence. You are not collecting information. You are building understanding. Follow-up questions also reveal emotional intelligence. In personal conversations, they show care. When someone shares something vulnerable and you ask a thoughtful follow-up, you signal that you are actually present. You show that their words mattered enough for you to reflect on them. That builds trust quickly. People feel seen when someone asks the right question at the right time. What makes this even more powerful is that follow-up questions often uncover truth. Many people speak in generalities. They gloss over details. They protect themselves with vague language. A sharp follow-up gently cuts through that fog. It brings specificity. It brings honesty. And because it is framed as curiosity rather than confrontation, it lowers defenses instead of raising them. There is also a strategic side to this trait. People who ask follow-up questions gather better information. They do not settle for incomplete pictures. They reduce uncertainty. In work settings, this leads to better decisions. In relationships, it prevents misunderstandings. In conflict, it exposes the real issue faster. Asking the right question can save hours of confusion. Another reason this trait signals intelligence is because it shows humility. To ask a follow-up question is to admit you do not fully understand yet. Many people avoid that because they want to appear knowledgeable. Intelligent people value understanding more than appearances. They are comfortable saying, "I want to go deeper." That openness accelerates learning. There is a neurological explanation here too. Brains that ask follow-up questions are actively seeking resolution. They notice gaps in understanding and feel motivated to close them. That drive keeps learning dynamic instead of passive. It turns conversation into exploration. Over time, this habit builds a more accurate internal model of the world. You may also notice that people who ask follow-up questions tend to be good thinkers overall. They do not jump to conclusions. They suspend judgment. They test ideas before accepting them. They are less likely to misinterpret because they clarify instead of assuming. That mental discipline shows up everywhere in their life. This ability becomes especially valuable in complex discussions. When topics are layered or emotionally charged, most people simplify too much or shut down. The person who asks follow-ups keeps the conversation grounded. They guide it gently forward. They help everyone involved think more clearly. That is leadership without dominance. There is also a social magnetism to this trait. People enjoy talking to someone who asks good questions. It feels collaborative instead of competitive. You are not being talked at, you are being engaged with. Over time, people seek out those conversations because they feel mentally stimulating and emotionally safe. What many people never realize is that asking follow-up questions is a sign of confidence, not insecurity. It takes confidence to slow down a conversation and explore it properly. It takes confidence to admit that understanding matters more than speed. And it takes intelligence to know which questions are worth asking. Asking follow-up questions also reveals a future-oriented mind. You are not just focused on the current exchange. You are thinking about where the conversation leads, what decisions depend on it, and what understanding is required next. That foresight separates reactive thinkers from thoughtful ones. Over time, this habit compounds quietly. Each good question leads to better answers. Better answers lead to better mental models. Better models lead to better decisions. People may not notice the process, but they notice the clarity that results from it. When you see someone consistently asking follow-up questions, you are watching a mind that refuses to stay on the surface. A mind that values depth over speed. A mind that engages with reality instead of skimming it. And once you recognize that ability, you understand that their intelligence is not about having answers. It is about knowing how to reach them. Stays curious. Some people never stop wondering. Even as adults, even after experience, even after being proven right 100 times, they still lean forward mentally. They still ask why. They still want to understand how things work beneath the surface. That quiet, persistent curiosity is one of the strongest signs of intelligence, yet it is often mistaken for restlessness or distraction. What surprises most people is that curiosity does not look like genius in motion. It looks ordinary. It looks like someone asking an extra question. Someone going down a rabbit hole late at night. Someone reading about things that have nothing to do with their job or immediate goals. It looks casual. But underneath that casual behavior is a mind that refuses to accept the world at face value. The shock comes when you realize how much this trait compounds. Curious people accumulate knowledge without trying to. They are not chasing information to impress anyone. They are following interest. And interest is a powerful engine. When the brain is genuinely curious, learning happens faster, deeper, and with less resistance. That is why curious people often seem to know a little about everything. They were never trying to be smart. They were trying to understand. Psychologically, curiosity is tied to dopamine, the same chemical associated with motivation and reward. When you are curious, your brain anticipates learning something new and treats it like a reward. That anticipation sharpens attention and memory. Information sticks not because you forced it in, but because your brain wanted it. This is why curiosity is one of the most reliable predictors of long-term intelligence growth. You can see this trait clearly in how curious people approach unfamiliar situations. Instead of shutting down or feeling threatened, they lean in. They ask questions. They observe. They explore. Where others feel discomfort, they feel intrigue. That emotional response changes everything. Curiosity turns uncertainty into opportunity. It keeps the mind flexible instead of defensive. This can feel deeply validating if you recognize it in yourself. Maybe you have always been interested in random topics. Maybe your mind jumps from science to psychology to art to history without warning. Maybe you were told to focus, specialize, or stick to one thing. But curiosity does not respect narrow boundaries. It follows connections. And those connections are where insight lives. Curious people also tend to be better thinkers because they question assumptions. They do not accept ideas just because they are popular or familiar. They ask where the idea came from, who benefits from it, and whether it actually holds up. That skepticism is not negativity. It is intellectual hygiene. It keeps their mental model of the world accurate and adaptable. Another overlooked aspect of curiosity is how it protects against stagnation. Many people stop learning once they feel competent. Curious people never feel done. Not because they are insecure, but because they know understanding is always partial. There is always another layer, another angle, another explanation. That humility keeps their intelligence alive. Curiosity also changes how people handle disagreement. Instead of getting defensive, curious minds ask how someone else arrived at their perspective. They are genuinely interested in different viewpoints. That does not mean they agree with everything. It means they want to understand before judging. This makes their thinking more nuanced and their conversations more productive. There is also an emotional resilience tied to curiosity. When things go wrong, curious people ask what they can learn from it. They turn setbacks into information. Instead of collapsing into frustration, they analyze. Why did this happen? What variables were at play? What can I adjust next time? That mindset reduces helplessness and increases agency. You may notice that curious people age differently. Mentally, they stay sharp, they stay engaged, they stay open. While others grow rigid, they remain flexible. That flexibility is not accidental. Curiosity keeps the brain forming new connections. It prevents cognitive decline by constantly challenging existing patterns. In many ways, curiosity is mental exercise disguised as interest. This trait also shows up in creativity. Curiosity fuels imagination. When you are curious, you explore possibilities instead of settling for defaults. You experiment. You combine ideas. You play mentally. That play is where originality comes from. People who stay curious are rarely boring thinkers because they are always exploring new angles. Curious people are also better at understanding people. They do not reduce others to labels. They wonder about motivations, experiences, and internal worlds. They ask thoughtful questions. They listen for meaning. That makes them empathetic without being naive. They understand complexity without needing to control it. One of the most powerful parts of curiosity is that it keeps ego in check. When you are curious, you are less concerned with being right and more concerned with being accurate. You are willing to update your beliefs. You are open to being wrong. That openness is not weakness. It is intellectual strength. It allows growth instead of stagnation. There is a quiet confidence in curiosity as well. You do not need to know everything to feel secure. You trust your ability to learn. That trust makes challenges less intimidating. You approach the unknown with interest instead of fear. Over time, that approach leads to competence across many areas of life. What many people never realize is that curiosity is a choice as much as it is a trait. It can be nurtured or neglected. Intelligent people tend to protect their curiosity. They avoid environments that punish questions. They seek conversations that stimulate thought. They give themselves permission to explore without immediate payoff. When you see someone who stays curious, you are looking at a mind that refuses to calcify, a mind that remains open, engaged, and alive, A mind that grows not because it has to, but because it wants to. And once you recognize that ability in someone, you understand that their intelligence is not fixed. It is expanding. Doesn't show off. Some of the smartest people you will ever meet are the hardest to notice at first. They do not announce themselves. They do not dominate conversations. They do not need to prove how much they know. In fact, if you are not paying attention, you might completely miss how sharp they really are. And that is exactly the point. Not showing off is one of the most underrated signs of real intelligence. What surprises most people is how counterintuitive this feels. We are conditioned to associate intelligence with visibility, the loudest voice, the quickest answer, the person who corrects everyone else. But truly intelligent people often move in the opposite direction. They are selective with their words. They speak when it adds value, not when it adds attention. That restraint can be mistaken for shyness or indifference, but it is neither. It is confidence without performance. The shock comes when you finally hear them speak up. When they do, what they say lands with weight. It is clear, thoughtful, often more accurate than everything that came before it. You realize they were listening the entire time, processing, observing, letting others reveal their thinking. And when they contribute, it shifts the conversation instead of crowding it. Psychologically, not showing off is linked to something called secure self-concept. People who feel secure in their intelligence do not need external validation to reinforce it. They are not trying to prove themselves to the room. They already know who they are. This frees up mental energy. Instead of managing impressions, they focus on understanding. That focus sharpens their thinking even further. You can see this trait clearly in group settings. While others rush to speak, they wait. While others interrupt, they listen. While others argue to win, they explore to understand. They are not silent because they have nothing to say. They are silent because they are choosing when it matters. That timing is intelligence in action. This can be deeply validating if you recognize it in yourself. Maybe you have always felt no urge to compete intellectually. Maybe you stay quiet even when you know the answer. Maybe you prefer depth over dominance. And maybe you have wondered if that makes you invisible. The truth is, restraint is not weakness. It is control. And control is a form of power that does not need to announce itself. There is also an emotional intelligence component here. People who do not show off are often attuned to social dynamics. They sense when speaking would derail the group. They know when someone else needs the space. They understand that conversation is not a competition. It is a shared process. That awareness makes them easy to trust and surprisingly influential. Another reason intelligent people avoid showing off is because they understand how little they actually know. The more you learn, the more aware you become of complexity and uncertainty. That awareness creates humility. You stop speaking in absolutes. You stop trying to look impressive. You start caring more about accuracy than appearance. That shift marks a deeper level of intelligence. You may notice that people who show off often repeat the same ideas. They recycle knowledge to maintain status. People who do not show off are constantly updating their thinking. They are open to being wrong. They change their mind when new information appears. That flexibility is incompatible with ego-driven performance. You cannot grow if you are busy protecting an image. This trait also shows up in how they handle being underestimated. They do not rush to correct assumptions. They let results speak. They let consistency build credibility. They know that proving intelligence through action lasts longer than proving it through words. That patience is rare, especially in a culture that rewards instant recognition. There is a strategic advantage here as well. When you do not show off, people reveal more around you. They feel less threatened. They speak more freely. They expose their thinking. That gives you information. And information is power. Quiet intelligence gathers data, while loud intelligence demands attention. This ability becomes especially noticeable under pressure. When egos flare and people scramble to assert themselves, the person who does not show off stays grounded. They focus on solutions, not status. They ask what matters, not who is right. That clarity cuts through chaos. And suddenly, people look to them for direction, even if they never ask to lead. There is also a moral dimension to this trait. Not showing off respects others. It leaves room. It avoids unnecessary comparison. It does not turn shared spaces into stages. That respect builds stronger relationships over time. People feel safe around those who do not need to dominate. What most people never realize is that intelligence does not need an audience. It does not gain value from applause. It is useful whether anyone is watching or not. People who understand this stop performing and start contributing. That shift changes how they move through the world. Over time, this trait compounds quietly. People begin to notice the consistency, the accuracy, the calm, the insight. Trust builds. Influence grows. Not because the person demanded it, but because they earned it through presence and precision. When you see someone who does not show off, you are looking at a mind that is secure, observant, and disciplined. A mind that values substance over spectacle. A mind that understands that intelligence is not about being seen as smart. It is about being effective. And once you recognize that, you realize the quietest person in the room is often the smartest one there. Explains things clearly. You can usually tell how smart someone really is by what happens after they explain something. Not while they are talking, but after. Do you feel clearer or more confused? Do things suddenly make sense, or do they feel heavier than before? When someone explains things clearly, it feels like mental fog lifting. And that ability is one of the strongest, most reliable signs of real intelligence. What shocks most people is that clear explanation has nothing to do with using big words or sounding impressive. In fact, it is often the opposite. The smartest explainers sound simple, almost too simple, and that simplicity can be misleading. People assume it must be easy if it sounds easy. But the truth is, clarity takes work. It requires understanding something so well that you can strip it down without losing its meaning. The moment of shock usually comes when you realize how rare this is. Many people talk around ideas. They repeat definitions. They drown concepts in details. They hide confusion behind complexity. But the person who explains things clearly cuts straight to the point. They organize the idea before they speak. They know where you are starting from mentally, and they guide you step by step without making you feel slow. Psychologically, this ability relies on something called perspective taking. The explainer is not just thinking about the idea. They are thinking about how the idea will land in someone else's mind. They anticipate confusion before it happens. They adjust language in real time. They notice when eyes glaze over or when understanding clicks. That level of mental flexibility is a form of intelligence that goes beyond raw knowledge. You can see this trait clearly when someone explains a difficult concept and you suddenly think, oh, that is it. Not because the concept changed, but because the framing did. The explainer found the right angle. They used the right example. They removed what did not matter. That moment of clarity feels almost physical, and you remember it long after. This can be deeply validating if you recognize it in yourself. Maybe people often tell you that you explain things well. Maybe friends come to you when they are confused. Maybe you have a natural instinct to break things down. And maybe you have underestimated that ability because it feels natural to you. But clarity is not common. It is a skill rooted in deep understanding. Another surprising part of this trait is that clear explainers are often fast learners themselves. When you can explain something clearly, it means you understand the structure of the idea. You know how the parts fit together. That same structural thinking helps you learn new things quickly. You are not memorizing. You are organizing. There is also a strong empathy component here. Clear explainers care about being understood, not about sounding smart. They notice when someone feels embarrassed or lost. They adjust without making it obvious. They explain without condescension. That emotional awareness keeps the listener engaged instead of defensive. And engagement is where learning happens. This trait becomes incredibly powerful in group settings. When confusion spreads, the person who can explain clearly becomes a stabilizing force. They translate chaos into order. They align everyone on the same page. That clarity saves time, reduces stress, and prevents mistakes. People may not always remember what was said, but they remember how grounded things felt afterward. What many people do not realize is that explaining clearly requires discipline. You have to resist the urge to include everything you know. You have to choose what to leave out. That choice requires judgment. It requires knowing what is essential and what is optional. People who lack understanding add more. People who understand deeply subtract. This ability also shows up in writing, teaching, and leadership. Clear communicators inspire confidence because clarity signals competence. When you understand something well enough to explain it simply, others trust your judgment. They feel safe following your reasoning. That trust does not come from authority. It comes from coherence. There is a neurological reason why clarity feels so good. The brain craves patterns and structure. When information is organized well, it requires less cognitive effort to process. That efficiency feels satisfying. Confusion creates friction. Clarity creates flow. The person who explains clearly gives your brain a smoother path to understanding. You may notice that people who explain things clearly are also good at resolving disagreements. They restate the issue accurately. They separate facts from feelings. They help both sides see the real point of tension. That reframing alone often dissolves conflict. When people feel understood, they become more flexible. There is also humility in this trait. Clear explainers are not threatened by questions. They welcome them. They see questions as feedback, not challenges. That openness keeps the explanation dynamic and responsive. It also signals confidence. You do not fear questions when you understand the material. Over time, this ability compounds into influence. People seek out those who make things understandable. They bring them into discussions. They ask for their input, not because they dominate, but because they clarify. Clarity becomes their signature. What most people never realize is that explaining things clearly is not about teaching others. It is about thinking clearly yourself. You cannot fake clarity for long. It exposes gaps instantly. That is why this trait is such a strong marker of intelligence. It reveals how organized and accurate a mind really is. When you see someone explain something clearly, you are watching a mind that understands structure, prioritizes meaning, and respects the listener, a mind that values understanding over performance. And once you recognize that ability, you understand that their intelligence is not loud or flashy. It is precise, generous, and incredibly effective. Spots hidden opportunities. Some people look at a situation and see exactly what everyone else sees: the rules, the limits, the obvious path forward. Others look at the same situation and notice something quieter: a gap, a leverage point, a door no one is paying attention to because it does not look like a door yet. When someone consistently spots hidden opportunities, you are watching a mind that operates beyond the surface. And once you notice it, you cannot unsee how powerful that ability really is. What surprises most people is that hidden opportunities are rarely dramatic. They do not announce themselves. They are subtle. They sit in overlooked details, unmet needs, ignored inefficiencies, or assumptions everyone else accepts without question. Most people are trained to follow existing paths. Intelligent opportunity spotters question why the path exists in the first place and whether another route might work better. The shock usually comes in hindsight, when something works out and everyone says it was obvious all along. But it was not obvious at the time. It only looks obvious after someone had the insight and acted on it. That delay between possibility and recognition is where intelligence shows up. The person who spots the opportunity sees value before it becomes popular or validated. This ability comes from a combination of pattern recognition and imagination. Opportunity spotters notice patterns in behavior, markets, systems, or relationships. But they also imagine alternative outcomes. They ask what could exist instead of accepting what already does. That blend of observation and possibility is rare. Most people lean heavily toward one or the other. Intelligent minds balance both. You can see this trait clearly in how someone responds to problems. While others complain or feel stuck, opportunity spotters ask what this situation makes possible. A limitation becomes a constraint that sparks creativity. A setback becomes information. An inconvenience becomes demand waiting to be met. This does not mean they ignore difficulty. It means they look for leverage within it. There is something deeply validating here if you recognize this in yourself. Maybe you have always seen angles others missed. Maybe you get ideas that feel slightly ahead of their time. Maybe people tell you it will not work until someone else does it later and gets praised for it. That frustration often comes from seeing opportunity before the world is ready to acknowledge it. That is not delusion. That is timing. Psychologically, this ability is tied to cognitive flexibility. The brain does not lock into one interpretation of reality. It can shift perspectives. It can reframe situations. It can hold multiple possibilities at once. That flexibility allows opportunity to emerge where rigid thinking sees only obstacles. Rigid minds protect certainty. Flexible minds discover options. Another reason this trait signals intelligence is because it requires comfort with uncertainty. Hidden opportunities are not guaranteed. They involve risk. They require acting before there is proof. Most people wait for validation. Opportunity spotters move earlier because they trust their analysis. They understand probability rather than certainty. That courage is not reckless. It is informed. You often see this ability in entrepreneurs, innovators, and quiet strategists. But it also shows up in everyday life. Someone notices an unspoken need in a relationship and fills it. Someone sees a skill gap at work and positions themselves there. Someone recognizes a pattern in their own behavior and changes course before it causes damage. These are all hidden opportunities. They just operate at different scales. What makes this even more interesting is that opportunity spotters are often underestimated. Because they do not follow obvious paths, others may question their choices. Their ideas may sound strange or impractical at first, but when results arrive, perception changes quickly. The same people who doubted them begin to call them visionary. That shift reveals how dependent most judgments are on outcomes rather than insight. There is also a learning advantage here. People who spot opportunities pay close attention to what others ignore. They listen between the lines. They observe friction points. They notice where effort is wasted. That attention gives them a richer data set. While others see noise, they see signal. Over time, this habit sharpens intuition. This trait also requires emotional intelligence. Hidden opportunities often involve people. Understanding unmet emotional needs, unspoken desires, or quiet dissatisfaction creates openings others miss. Someone who can read emotions well can spot relational opportunities long before they are verbalized. That ability can strengthen connections, resolve conflicts early, and create trust. Another overlooked part of this skill is patience. Just because you see an opportunity does not mean you act immediately. Intelligent opportunity spotters know timing matters. They watch, they wait, they prepare, they let conditions align. That restraint prevents wasted effort and increases the chance of success. Opportunity is not just about seeing. It is about knowing when to move. You may notice that people who spot hidden opportunities are rarely bored. Even in dull environments, their mind stays active. They look for improvement, efficiency, or novelty. They mentally rearrange systems. They imagine alternatives. That internal engagement keeps their thinking sharp and adaptive. There is also a self-directed aspect to this trait. Opportunity spotters do not rely on permission. They do not wait to be told what is possible. They explore on their own. They experiment quietly. They test ideas on a small scale before committing fully. That independence allows them to move faster and with more precision. Over time, this ability compounds dramatically. Each opportunity spotted and tested refines judgment. You learn which signals matter. You learn how to evaluate risk. You build confidence in your perception. That confidence does not make you reckless. It makes you decisive. What most people never realize is that hidden opportunities are everywhere. They are just invisible to minds that only look where everyone else is looking. Intelligence shifts the gaze. It notices the overlooked. It questions the assumed. It imagines alternatives. When you see someone consistently spotting hidden opportunities, you are looking at a mind that sees value before it is obvious. A mind that understands systems, timing, and human behavior. A mind that does not wait for doors to open, but notices the hinges before anyone else even sees a wall. Understands timing. Some people can do the right thing and still fail because they do it at the wrong time. Others do the same thing later or earlier and succeed effortlessly. That difference is not luck. It is timing. And when someone consistently understands timing, you are looking at a form of intelligence that is subtle, strategic, and often misunderstood. What surprises most people is that timing has very little to do with speed. In fact, the smartest people are often not the fastest movers. They wait. They watch. They let situations unfold just enough before stepping in. To outsiders, it can look like hesitation or indecision, but internally, their mind is tracking variables: emotional readiness, social momentum, resource availability, risk levels. When the moment is right, they move without delay. That contrast between patience and decisiveness is what makes this trait so powerful. The shock usually comes when you compare outcomes. Two people have the same idea. One rushes and burns out. The other waits and succeeds. Two people speak the same truth. One creates conflict. The other creates change. The difference was not intelligence in isolation. It was intelligence applied at the right moment. Timing turns ordinary actions into effective ones. Psychologically, understanding timing requires impulse control and situational awareness. The brain has to resist the urge for immediate action and instead assess context. Most people act when emotion peaks. They speak when frustration is highest or excitement is strongest. Someone who understands timing notices those emotions but does not let them decide. They ask a quieter question. Is now the moment this will land? That pause is intelligence creating leverage. You can see this clearly in conversations. A well-timed comment can change the direction of a discussion. The same comment said too early gets ignored. Too late and it loses relevance. Intelligent communicators sense when people are open, when defenses are down, when curiosity is active. They wait for receptivity. That awareness makes their words carry more weight. This can feel deeply validating if you recognize it in yourself. Maybe you have always known when not to speak. Maybe you wait to act until conditions feel aligned. Maybe you have been told you missed your chance when you were actually protecting your future move. Understanding timing often means tolerating misunderstanding. People who rush rarely respect patience until results prove it was intentional. There is also an emotional intelligence layer here. Timing is deeply connected to human readiness. People change not when information appears, but when they are emotionally prepared to receive it. Someone who understands timing can sense when another person is overwhelmed, defensive, or open. They adjust accordingly. They know that truth delivered at the wrong moment can feel like an attack, while the same truth later can feel like support. This skill shows up strongly in leadership, even in formal leadership. A leader who understands timing does not force change prematurely. They build alignment first. They introduce ideas gradually. They let momentum build. When they finally act, the group moves with them instead of resisting. That is not manipulation. It is respect for human dynamics. There is also a strategic side to timing that applies to opportunities. Acting too early can waste resources. Acting too late can miss the window. Intelligent timing lives in the narrow space between preparation and action. It requires foresight and restraint. You prepare quietly so that when the window opens, you are ready. That readiness makes action look effortless. You may notice that people who understand timing are rarely frantic. They do not chase everything. They choose. They understand that not every opportunity is meant for now. That selectivity preserves energy and focus. While others scatter themselves thin, they concentrate their effort where it will matter most. Neurologically, this trait relies on the brain's ability to predict and regulate. Timing requires forecasting near future states and controlling impulses in the present. It blends foresight with discipline. Many people have one without the other. They either see what is coming but act too soon, or they wait forever because they fear acting at all. Intelligence shows up when both are balanced. This ability also protects against regret. Many regrets come not from doing the wrong thing, but from doing the right thing at the wrong time, saying yes too early, saying no too late. Understanding timing reduces these errors because decisions are aligned with context instead of emotion. You see this in personal growth as well. Intelligent people do not force change when they are not ready to sustain it. They wait until habits, environment, and mindset align. That patience leads to lasting change instead of cycles of motivation and collapse. Timing makes growth sustainable. Another overlooked aspect of timing is knowing when to stop, knowing when to exit a situation, end a conversation, or let go of a path requires as much intelligence as knowing when to begin. Many people cling too long because they do not want to accept that the moment has passed. Someone who understands timing recognizes expiration as clearly as opportunity. That clarity saves time, energy, and emotional cost. This trait can make someone seem mysterious. Their moves feel intentional. Their actions feel aligned. People may not understand why they waited or why they acted when they did, but they feel the impact. Timing creates gravity. It makes choices feel meaningful instead of random. Over time, understanding timing compounds into wisdom. Each experience sharpens sensitivity to rhythm. You learn when to push and when to pause, when to speak and when to listen, when to act and when to prepare. Life stops feeling chaotic and starts feeling patterned. That pattern recognition reduces anxiety and increases effectiveness. What most people never realize is that timing is not about control. It is about attunement. It is about reading reality accurately and responding in harmony with it. You are not forcing outcomes. You are aligning with them. When you see someone who consistently understands timing, you are looking at a mind that respects context, emotion, and consequence. A mind that knows action without alignment is wasted effort. A mind that moves with precision instead of panic. And once you recognize that ability, you understand that their intelligence is not just about what they do. It is about when they do it. Solves problems creatively. Some people face a problem and freeze. Others rush straight toward the most obvious solution and hope it works. But then there is a third type of person. The one who pauses, tilts their head slightly, and sees the problem differently. Not harder, not bigger, just different. When someone consistently solves problems creatively, you are watching intelligence express itself through imagination and flexibility rather than force. What surprises most people is that creative problem solving does not look dramatic in the moment. There is no frantic energy, no panic. Often it looks almost casual. While others are stuck arguing over limited options, this person quietly reframes the situation. They change the question instead of fighting the answer. And that shift alone opens doors most people never see. The shock usually comes afterward, when their solution works and everyone says they would have never thought of that. That reaction reveals something important. The problem was never impossible. It was just being viewed from the wrong angle. Creative thinkers instinctively rotate the mental picture until a path appears. This ability is rooted in cognitive flexibility. Instead of locking onto a single approach, the brain keeps multiple interpretations active. It asks, what if the opposite is true? What if the constraint is actually an advantage? What if the goal can be reached indirectly? Most people treat problems like walls. Creative minds treat them like puzzles. You can see this trait clearly when resources are limited. When time, money, or options are scarce, many people feel trapped. Creative problem solvers feel challenged. They look for workarounds. They repurpose tools. They combine ideas that do not normally belong together. They understand that limitation often forces innovation, not failure. This can feel validating if you recognize it in yourself. Maybe you have always found unconventional ways around obstacles. Maybe standard solutions felt boring or ineffective to you. Maybe you were told you overthink things when you were actually rethinking them. Creative intelligence often goes unrecognized because it does not follow predictable paths. Another reason this trait signals intelligence is because it requires comfort with uncertainty. Creative solutions are rarely guaranteed. They involve experimentation, trial and error, adjustments. Many people avoid creativity because they fear being wrong. Creative problem solvers accept that wrong answers are part of the process. They learn faster because they test faster. Emotionally, this trait also helps regulate stress. When you believe there is always another angle, panic loses its grip. You do not feel trapped as easily. Your mind stays mobile. That emotional steadiness allows better thinking under pressure. Creativity thrives when fear is low and curiosity is high. You may notice that creative problem solvers ask unusual questions. Instead of asking, "How do I fix this?" they ask, "What is this really about?" Instead of asking who is to blame, they ask what is missing. Those questions bypass surface drama and target root causes. Solving the right problem is often more important than solving it quickly. This skill shows up everywhere. In relationships, someone finds a way to meet needs without escalating conflict. At work, someone redesigns a process instead of arguing over inefficiencies. In personal growth, someone changes their environment instead of relying on willpower alone. Creativity turns obstacles into design challenges. Neurologically, creative problem solving involves connecting distant ideas. The brain pulls from different experiences, domains, and memories, then blends them into something new. That ability strengthens with curiosity and exposure. The more varied your inputs, the more options your mind can generate under pressure. Another overlooked aspect of this trait is humility. Creative problem solvers do not assume they already have the answer. They explore, they test, they listen, they adjust. That openness prevents tunnel vision. Intelligence here is not about being right immediately. It is about staying adaptive until something works. People with this ability are often underestimated because their solutions do not follow tradition. They may be questioned or doubted initially, but results speak louder than approval. Once their approach works, skepticism turns into admiration. Creativity often looks strange before it looks smart. There is also a long-term advantage. Each creative solution builds confidence in your ability to handle future problems. You stop fearing obstacles because you trust your capacity to navigate them. That trust reduces anxiety and increases resilience. Life feels less threatening when you know you can improvise. This trait compounds quietly. Over time, you build a reputation as someone who can figure things out. People bring you messy problems, unclear situations, difficult dynamics, not because you have all the answers, but because you find them when others cannot. What most people never realize is that creative problem solving is not about brilliance. It is about perspective. It is about refusing to accept that the first view is the only one. Intelligence shows up when you stay mentally flexible instead of emotionally rigid. When you see someone solve problems creatively, you are watching a mind that refuses to be boxed in. A mind that sees options where others see walls. A mind that understands that most problems are not dead ends. They are invitations to think differently. Uses smart humor. Some people use humor like noise. It fills space but adds nothing. Then there are people whose humor feels surgical. One comment perfectly placed, and suddenly everyone understands the situation better. Smart humor is not about being funny. It is about seeing clearly and choosing the lightest way to reveal the truth. What surprises most people is that smart humor comes from awareness, not wit. The person is paying attention to tone, tension, and timing all at once. They notice what everyone else is feeling but avoiding. Instead of confronting it directly, they wrap it in humor. The laugh happens because the truth lands safely. The shock is realizing how fast the brain has to work to do this well. In seconds, someone has to read the room, detect an underlying contradiction, predict how people will react, and compress that insight into something simple. That is not accidental. That is intelligence operating at speed. Psychologically, smart humor relies on pattern recognition. Humor lives in the gap between expectation and reality. Intelligent minds spot those gaps quickly. They notice irony. They notice absurdity. They notice when behavior and intention do not line up. Then they point to it without attacking anyone. You can see this most clearly under pressure. When stress rises, most people get rigid or emotional. Someone with smart humor stays flexible. They release tension with a comment that reframes the moment. Nothing about the problem changes, but how people feel does. That emotional reset makes clearer thinking possible. This can feel validating if you recognize it in yourself. Maybe humor has always been how you handle intensity. Maybe you joke when things get heavy because you see the bigger picture. That is not avoidance. That is perspective. You are creating breathing room so the situation does not control everyone in it. Another reason smart humor signals intelligence is emotional awareness. You cannot use it well if you do not understand people. Smart humor adjusts to the audience. It senses limits. It avoids punching down. It often targets shared experience or the situation itself. That sensitivity requires empathy, not ego. You may notice that people with smart humor are good at saying uncomfortable things. A joke can deliver feedback without triggering defense. Humor lowers resistance. People laugh first, then realize something important was said. That is influence without force. There is also confidence in this trait. Smart humor does not chase laughs. It does not explain itself. It does not panic if it misses. The person trusts timing and lets silence exist. That restraint signals self-assurance. People who feel insecure often overdo humor. Intelligent humor is economical. Neurologically, humor activates language, memory, emotion, and prediction at once. Creating it in real time requires fast coordination. That is why sharp humor often overlaps with adaptability and problem solving. It is the same mental agility, just expressed socially. You also see this trait when someone handles mistakes. Instead of collapsing into embarrassment, they make a light observation that restores balance. Not to escape responsibility, but to keep perspective. That ability to regulate ego preserves mental energy. Smart humor also reveals how someone sees the world. Their jokes often reflect insight into human habits and contradictions. People laugh because it feels true. Humor becomes a mirror, not a weapon. This trait is often underestimated because it looks effortless. People assume the joke just happened. They do not see the rapid analysis behind it. But when you slow it down, you realize how precise the thinking has to be. Smart humor is intelligence choosing ease instead of dominance. Insight delivered without aggression. And when someone can make people laugh while keeping the moment grounded, you are not just seeing someone funny. You are seeing a sharp, socially intelligent mind at work. Sees multiple perspectives. Some people enter a situation already convinced they are right. They pick a side, defend it, and stop listening. Others pause and ask a quieter question. What else could be true here? When someone naturally sees multiple perspectives, It is one of the clearest signs that their intelligence is flexible rather than rigid. What surprises most people is that this ability is not about being indecisive. It is not about lacking opinions. In fact, people who see multiple perspectives often have strong views. The difference is that they understand those views are not the only possible ones. They can hold their position while still understanding why someone else sees it differently. The shock usually comes during conflict. While emotions rise and people dig in, this person does something unexpected. They articulate the other side better than the other side does. Suddenly, the argument slows down. Tension drops. Everyone feels more understood. That moment reveals how much mental processing is happening beneath the surface. Psychologically, this trait relies on cognitive empathy. The brain temporarily steps outside its own viewpoint and simulates another one. That takes effort. Most people are too busy defending their identity to do it. Intelligent minds are less threatened by alternative perspectives, so they can explore them without feeling attacked. You can see this clearly in conversations. Someone explains their opinion, and instead of immediately responding, the perspective taker reflects it back accurately. Not to agree, but to show understanding. That alone changes the dynamic. People relax when they feel seen, and relaxed people think more clearly. This can feel validating if you recognize it in yourself. Maybe you have always been able to understand both sides of an issue. Maybe people accuse you of sitting on the fence when you are actually standing above it. Seeing multiple perspectives does not mean you lack conviction. It means you value accuracy over ego. Another reason this trait signals intelligence is because it requires emotional regulation. When feelings are intense, perspective narrows. Anger, fear, and pride all shrink vision. Someone who can still see multiple angles in emotionally charged moments has control over their inner state. That control preserves clarity. This ability is especially powerful in problem solving. Many problems persist because people argue from fixed positions. A multi-perspective thinker reframes the issue so it includes everyone's concerns. Suddenly, solutions appear that were invisible before. Understanding expands the solution space. You may notice that people with this trait ask better questions. Instead of asking who is right, they ask what each person is trying to protect. Instead of asking what went wrong, they ask what made sense at the time. These questions reduce blame and increase insight. There is also humility in this ability. Seeing multiple perspectives means accepting that your view is shaped by limited experience. Intelligent people are comfortable with that limitation. They do not confuse their perspective with reality itself. That humility keeps learning alive. Neurologically, this trait involves switching between mental models. The brain inhibits its default response and activates an alternative interpretation. That flexibility strengthens over time. The more perspectives you explore, the easier it becomes to move between them without confusion. This skill shows up strongly in leadership and relationships. People trust those who understand them, even when they disagree. Perspective taking builds credibility. It signals fairness and depth. People feel safer sharing honest thoughts when they know they will not be dismissed. You also see this trait in how someone handles criticism. Instead of reacting defensively, they look for the signal inside the feedback. Even poorly delivered criticism can contain useful information. Seeing multiple perspectives allows someone to extract value without absorbing unnecessary harm. This ability is often misunderstood as weakness because it does not look dominant. It does not shout certainty. But in reality, it creates influence. When you understand others deeply, you can navigate situations with precision instead of force. Over time, this trait compounds into wisdom. Life feels less polarizing. Fewer situations feel black and white. You respond instead of react. That calm clarity improves decision-making across every area. Seeing multiple perspectives is intelligence, refusing to collapse reality into a single story. It is the ability to stay curious when others become certain. And when you notice someone who can understand many sides without losing themselves, you are looking at a mind that is both sharp and expansive. Questions assumptions. Most people move through life responding to what they believe is true, rarely stopping to ask why they believe it in the first place. They accept rules, labels, and explanations as fixed. Then there are people who pause and quietly question the foundation underneath everything. When someone naturally questions assumptions, it is a strong signal of deep intelligence at work. What surprises most people is that questioning assumptions does not look rebellious or confrontational. It often looks calm, curious, almost gentle. The person is not trying to prove others wrong. They are trying to understand what is actually going on. They ask questions most people skip because those questions feel uncomfortable or inconvenient. The shock comes when you realize how many problems exist only because no one challenged the starting point. People argue endlessly about solutions without noticing that the problem itself was defined incorrectly. Someone who questions assumptions steps back and asks a simple but powerful question. What if this belief is wrong? That single shift can collapse confusion instantly. Psychologically, this trait requires independence of thought. The brain resists default explanations and examines them instead. Most people rely on social proof. If everyone agrees, it must be true. Intelligent minds are less impressed by consensus. They care more about evidence, logic, and coherence. That does not make them contrarian. It makes them precise. You can see this clearly in conversations. While others debate surface details, the assumption questioner asks why this rule exists, who benefits from it, or whether it still applies. Suddenly, the discussion changes. People realize they were building arguments on unstable ground. That awareness is uncomfortable, but it is where real insight begins. This can feel validating if you recognize it in yourself. Maybe you have always felt uneasy accepting explanations at face value. Maybe you ask questions that make people pause. Maybe you were told you think too much when you were actually thinking deeper. Questioning assumptions is not negativity. It is curiosity aimed at truth. Another reason this trait signals intelligence is because it requires tolerance for uncertainty. When you question assumptions, you temporarily lose certainty. Many people avoid this because certainty feels safe. Intelligent minds are willing to sit in not knowing while they investigate. That patience allows better conclusions to form. This skill is especially powerful in problem solving. Many stuck situations persist because everyone agrees on a false premise. Someone who questions that premise unlocks new options instantly. Solutions appear not because effort increased, but because clarity improved. You may notice that people with this trait ask deceptively simple questions. Why does it have to be this way? Who decided that? What would happen if we did the opposite? These questions are not naive. They are foundational. They strip away layers of habit and expose the core of the issue. There is also humility in this ability. Questioning assumptions means accepting that your own beliefs may be incomplete or wrong. Intelligent people are not threatened by that possibility. They see belief revision as growth, not failure. That openness keeps their thinking adaptive. Neurologically, this trait involves inhibiting automatic responses. The brain pauses its default pattern and considers alternatives. That pause creates space for insight. Over time, this habit strengthens mental flexibility and reduces blind spots. You see this trait strongly in innovators and strategists. They do not ask how to improve the existing system until they understand whether the system makes sense at all. That perspective allows breakthroughs instead of incremental change. This ability is often misunderstood as skepticism or negativity. But the goal is not to tear things down. It is to understand what actually holds up. Questioning assumptions strengthens ideas that survive and discards ones that do not. Over time, this trait leads to better decisions. You rely less on inherited beliefs and more on examined ones. Life feels less confusing because fewer things are taken for granted. Questioning assumptions is intelligence refusing to build on weak foundations. It is curiosity aimed at accuracy. And when you notice someone who calmly asks the questions everyone else avoids, you are looking at a mind that values truth over comfort. Stays composed in debates. When debates heat up, most people reveal more emotion than logic. Voices rise. Listening drops. The goal quietly shifts from understanding to winning. But every so often, there is someone who stays steady no matter how intense the exchange becomes. They do not rush. They do not snap. They do not need to dominate the room. When someone stays composed in debates, it is a clear sign of intelligence paired with self-control. What surprises most people is that composure is not passivity. It is not silence. It is not weakness. In fact, staying calm while others escalate takes effort. It requires regulating emotion while still tracking arguments, tone, and intent. That balance is mentally demanding. Most people lose clarity the moment they feel challenged. Intelligent debaters protect clarity above all else. The shock comes when you realize how powerful calm really is. While others get louder, the composed person becomes more persuasive. Their points land harder because they are not buried under emotion. They listen fully before responding. They address the strongest version of the opposing argument instead of attacking weak parts. That precision shifts the dynamic of the entire debate. Psychologically, this trait relies on emotional regulation. The brain resists reacting impulsively to threat or ego injury. Instead of activating fight mode, it stays analytical. That allows the person to separate ideas from identity. They can challenge a point without feeling personally attacked. That separation is a major marker of intelligence. You can see this clearly when someone disagrees strongly but respectfully. They do not interrupt. They do not mock. They restate the other side accurately before responding. That alone earns credibility. People are more open to being challenged when they feel understood first. This can feel validating if you recognize it in yourself. Maybe debates have never felt like battles to you. Maybe you stay calm even when others accuse you of not caring enough. But composure does not mean indifference. It means you value truth over emotional release. You care enough to stay clear-headed. Another reason this trait signals intelligence is because it reflects confidence. People who feel insecure often argue emotionally because they fear losing status. Composed debaters do not feel that threat. They know disagreement does not reduce their worth. That security frees them to focus on reasoning instead of defense. This skill is especially powerful because emotion narrows thinking. Anger, frustration, and pride all reduce cognitive flexibility. Staying calm keeps the mind open. It allows someone to notice flaws in their own argument and adjust. That willingness to update beliefs mid-debate is rare and intelligent. You may notice that composed debaters ask better questions. Instead of pushing points aggressively, they probe assumptions. They ask for clarification. They invite explanation. These questions slow the conversation down and expose weak reasoning without hostility. Neurologically, this trait involves controlling the amygdala response and keeping the prefrontal cortex engaged. In simple terms, the emotional alarm does not hijack thinking. That control allows logical processing to continue even under social pressure. This ability also builds trust. People may not agree with a calm debater, but they respect them. Respect keeps conversations productive. Over time, people are more willing to engage honestly with someone who does not explode when challenged. Staying composed also prevents unnecessary damage. Many debates leave emotional scars because words are said in heat. Intelligent composure protects relationships while still allowing disagreement. That balance is hard to achieve and highly valuable. This trait is often misunderstood. Calm people may be seen as detached or overly controlled, but inside they are actively processing. They are choosing responses instead of reacting. That choice is intelligence exercising restraint. Over time, this ability compounds. You become someone others trust in difficult conversations. People bring complex issues to you because they know you will not escalate. Influence grows quietly. Staying composed in debates is intelligence paired with emotional mastery. It is clarity under pressure. And when you see someone who can disagree fiercely without losing control, you are watching a mind that values understanding more than victory. Learns by observing. Some people need to be told what to do step by step. Others barely say a word, yet somehow figure things out faster than everyone else. They watch, they notice, they absorb. When someone learns by observing, it is a quiet but powerful sign of intelligence that does not need constant instruction. What surprises most people is how active observation really is. From the outside, it can look like passivity, like they are just sitting there. But internally, their mind is working hard. They are tracking patterns, cause and effect, timing, and reactions. They learn not just from what people say, but from what actually happens afterward. The shock comes when they act. Suddenly they know exactly what to do, even though no one explicitly taught them. They avoid common mistakes. They move with confidence. Others wonder how they picked it up so fast. The answer is simple. They were paying attention when others were busy performing or talking. Psychologically, learning by observing relies on pattern recognition and delayed response. Instead of jumping in immediately, the brain gathers data first. It watches outcomes. It compares approaches. It filters what works from what does not. This creates a deeper understanding than trial and error alone. You can see this clearly in new environments. A workplace, a social group, a complex task. While others ask endless questions or rush into action, the observer watches how things really function. Who has influence? What behaviors are rewarded? Where the friction points are? That knowledge gives them an advantage later. This can feel validating if you recognize it in yourself. Maybe you have always learned best by watching others. Maybe instructions never fully clicked until you saw them applied. Maybe you were quiet not because you were unsure, but because you were studying the system. That is not hesitation. That is intelligence choosing efficiency. Another reason this trait signals intelligence is because it requires patience. Observation means delaying action. Many people struggle with that. They want to prove themselves immediately. Intelligent observers understand that early restraint leads to better long-term performance. They would rather move once with accuracy than rush and correct later. This skill is especially useful in social situations. Observers pick up on tone, body language, and unspoken rules. They learn what is acceptable without needing to test boundaries publicly. That awareness helps them adapt smoothly and avoid unnecessary conflict. Neurologically, observational learning activates mirror neurons. The brain simulates actions internally without performing them physically. This allows learning without direct risk. Intelligent minds make strong use of this system. They can model behavior mentally and predict outcomes before acting. You may notice that people who learn by observing often ask fewer questions but better ones. Their questions are specific because they already understand the basics. They are filling gaps, not starting from zero. That precision reflects how much information they have already gathered silently. This trait also protects against overconfidence. Observers see how complex reality really is. They notice unexpected consequences. That awareness makes them cautious in a productive way. They do not assume mastery before earning it. Learning by observing is often misunderstood as lack of initiative. But over time, the results speak. Observers tend to make fewer mistakes, adapt faster, and integrate more smoothly. Their learning curve looks flat at first, then suddenly steep. In leadership, this trait becomes even more powerful. Leaders who observe before acting understand their people better. They make decisions based on reality, not assumption. That accuracy builds trust. Learning by observing is intelligence that listens with the eyes. It values information over attention. And when you see someone who quietly watches, understands, and then moves with precision, you are looking at a mind that learns deeply without needing the spotlight.